Good morning, everyone. Welcome. The entire issue of spirituality, the entire issue of delusion and realization hinges on essentially a psychological quirk of human nature, which is our tendency to generate hypothetical models of what's going on, and then our automatic ability and, again, possibly tendency to orient to them as if they were actual by a mechanism which is essentially similar, essentially identical to hypnotic phenomena. It's like, a stage hypnotist can, do their thing on you and get you to cluck like a chicken, and if it's done well, you won't even know that anything happened. You'll just cluck like a chicken all of a sudden, and it'll seem like a reasonable thing to do to you, even though it's been entirely, essentially, artificially constructed, within your psychology. And this mechanism is what causes all the problems, and understanding this mechanism is what presents the solution, enables the solution, which is simply not to dismantle this mechanism, because it's our natural tendency to do this, but to see that it is in effect, and then you're relatively freed from being under its sway, unconsciously. These frames of reference that we spontaneously, or that, let's just say, end up being constructed in our imagination and essentially held to be objectively true, is essentially a filtering mechanism. Nothing is added to the actuality by this mechanism. On the contrary, a lot is taken away. In other words, it's a selective mechanism of denial. It's a selective mechanism of removal, or not paying attention to aspects of which are experientially actual. It may be that this very same mechanism is responsible for the apparent creation of the so-called conscious mind, as opposed to the unconscious mind, and this apparent barrier between them. I don't really know. I'm totally out of my depth talking about psychology in any formal sense. But I can say that the process of spiritual unfoldment, the process of coming to realization, is very much a process of the barrier between so-called conscious mind and so-called unconscious mind essentially becoming permeable, and ultimately disappearing. Because a great deal of our experience is extremely nonlinear, extremely wild and strange and unstructured, and the conscious mind is expert at completely ignoring that fact. The conscious mind is very expert at being with experience in very specific terms that it acknowledges, and somehow having the rest be so effectively denied that it's not even noticed that it's occurring. And the process of spiritual training, the process of all these various practices of meditation and so on and so forth, essentially serve the purpose, if they're effective, of sensitizing the practitioner to these subtler modes of experience that are actual and are omnipresent, and yet we are sort of conditioned to not notice, to not acknowledge, to not participate in. So in a sense, realization means coming to experience the fullness of your experience as it actually is. as contrasted with this very heavy-handed, very selective filtering mechanism that this strange psychological proclivity seems to set up. The actuality of experience itself is, in many regards, drastically different than a sort of a consensus reality worldview holds it to be. And through this process, through this sort of essentially hypnotic mechanism of filtering, experience is sort of seen through a frame of reference as being various ways objectively. And so powerful is this mechanism that this is felt and perceived to be objectively true, undeniably, and unquestionably. And to the extent that one under this sway would be liable to take any suggestion that things are alternate to the way they're being held as, you're nuts, what are you crazy? Whereas the actuality of what experience actually is very interesting, and it is the discovery of these interesting qualities that spirituality consists of, developing sensitivity to these subtler, generally speaking, let's call them subtler aspects of experience that the conditioned mind, or that this mind that is experiencing things censored by this heavy-handed frame of reference, just cannot acknowledge experiential. And so the actual condition that you consist of, the actual condition that a human being is wildly and utterly different than sort of a consensus reality. The implications of a consensus reality are kind of a normalcy of what, the sort of man on the street idea of what reality is and what the world is and what experience is and so on and so forth. We're all, of course, very familiar with consensus, sort of norms of what is held to be true. We're all, the material world is objectively real and is ultimate reality. We are all sort of derived from that. Our bodies are outgrowths of this through mysterious processes of evolution and the quirks of physics. So the DNA formed, and then all of these complex biological systems evolved essentially accidentally by successive rolls of the dice or what have you. And our consciousness is somehow a byproduct of this sort of, autonomous, electrochemical brain activity that the molecules by their very nature generates. And so our consciousness is this little small subsystem of our bodies, which are a tiny, tiny, tiny autonomous functioning system within a vast material world that is, if not threatening, at least out there and problematic or of significant interest in many regards. So this is everyone knows this. This is just completely implicit in the sort of communications and so on that the media presents and all of this, and it's all utter balderdash. It's completely and utterly and fundamentally inaccurate. And the discovery that this is so, and the discovery self-verifyingly, experientially, of precisely the way it is so, and precisely what is actually the nature of this situation here, is what spirituality, true spirituality, consists of. So, if you'd like, I'll invite you to join me in a little experiment. Here you are, right? Here, this is your experience. Your experience is here. Your experience is present. Feel what that means. Feel that your experience it's present. It's self-evident. I mean, it's just intuitively obvious. Of course, my experience is present. It always is. Well, right, of course. What is that? What is this presence that is here? Your experience is here. So what's your experience? Well, the field of vision is appearing, right, in your experience, and everything that appears within the field of vision is appearing as experiential characteristics of vision, whatever they are, who knows, right? Field of hearing is appearing within the field of your experience. Your experience is kind of like a loose, fuzzy-edged bubble that's just floating where? In nowhere, who knows what. But here it is. It's real, it's actual, it's right here. This is your experience. So, the field of vision is here, this sort of fuzzy-edged ovoid floating, for me it's sort of right, like this, whatever, and it's fuzzy-edged, and, well, what's outside it? Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? But leave that aside. Here it is floating there. Field of hearing is floating here, but it's right here, it's present, it's clearly actual. Where is it in relation to the field of vision? Where is it situated? It's kind of, it's not really a spatial orientation, it's in a different bit of bandwidth, isn't it? It's kind of a different dimension or something. And then field of sensation, the touch, feel all the tinglings, feelings that seem to constitute your body, so on and so forth. And, where is that? Well, it's my body. But it's the other way around. The field of sensation is here, and so the body is just a sort of a designation of this field of sensation, essentially. And where is it in relation to the field of vision? Well, the body's sensation seems to be sort of very spatially oriented in many regards. It has extension, and it correlates somewhat with, the field of vision. I can see my hand moving, and I feel some degree of some kind of a partial correspondence of sensations and so on. But then, what's that really? What shape is my body if I close my eyes and just feel it? It sort of spreads out. It loses a little focus. It has a little bit of different emphasis. And then if there's a little pain or a little pleasure or something, all of a sudden something flares up and jumps to dominance, right? And then there's field of taste and smell floating around here in their own dimensions. And thought, well, that's an interesting one. Thought is present. Where is it present? Thought is actually something that's present. You wouldn't know you're thinking unless there was something there, experientially, right? Well, what is it? I mean, right now, thought, some degree of thought is appearing in your experience, right? So what is this? What are these things? This thing, what is this substance? What is this texture, experientially? What's thought made of? It must be made of something. I mean, vision, we say vision is made of light. Light is completely obvious. It's subtle. You can't say what it is, but you can very clearly and directly see it and feel its texture. The texture of light is very specifically light. You wouldn't mistake light for sound. They have very different textures. Light it's obviously absurd to try and put words on it, but light has a fineness and a precision and a sort of a high frequency, sort of a tingle to it or something, let's say. That's obviously an arbitrary classification, but light feels like light. Light is experientially, light is quite clear. So what is thought? Well, it's something, isn't it? But It's interesting. It's subtle. It's like the Northern Lights or something. It's very amorphous, and yet, of course, it's actual, and it has a very interesting texture, very, sort of fleeting and dynamic and dancing. And I mean, who knows what? Obviously, these characterizations are completely absurd and inaccurate, but these things are experienced. Thought is an experiential actuality. Thought is actually present in experience, or you wouldn't know you're thinking. Something is present in the same sense as when you're seeing, something is present. Light is present, whatever that means. Still, it's a self-verifying and obvious fact, and it can be investigated because since light is present experientially, you can check it out. You can go to light and be with light and see, well, what is light? What does it feel like? What is light experientially? It's something. It's not nothing. Light is real. But what is it? And so again, you can go to these actualities and be with them. And I'm not trying to figure it out. I'm not trying to answer 20 questions or come up with a description or write a thesis, but just acquaint yourself experientially, non-verbally, with the actuality, with the nature of the actuality that is experientially present, just as it is, without preconceptions. Forget everything you've ever been told about what light is or what sound is or what anything is, and just, well, what is it experientially? How do I know light is present? Well, because it is. Okay, cool. So what is present when light is present? And so on and so forth. You go to thought, you find the same thing. So we've looked at the 5 sense fields, let's say 6 sense fields, including thought. And what else is there? Well, there's a lot else, isn't there? There's just sort of these subtle, you can't say all of a sudden we don't have words anymore. I mean, not that we ever really did, right? But little subtle vibes and subtle, who knows what. I mean, if you look at the field of vision as a sort of an entity, as a field with its own kind of spatiality, and you look at the field of hearing with its own dimension of what it is, and the field of thought, where it is, and all these different sense fields, is that the whole shooting match? And well, it's not. What happens? What do you find when you go outside these fields experientially? When you just go to the edge of your field of vision, just here's your field of vision. Just go to the edge, and it kind of gets fuzzier and fuzzier, and kind of more and more indistinct until it doesn't really have an edge or an end, does it? And then go a little farther. What's there? It's not like you hit a wall, is it? It's not like you fall off something. It's very subtle, but it's not nothing. And the same with all of these other aspects of sense field. So anyway, this kind of exploration is just a way of reconnecting with what experience actually is directly, experientially, rather than having this, essentially conceptually constructed, there's space and there's time and there's bodies and there's here and there and there's all these things, which are basically abstractions superimposed on the experiential actuality of the actual presence of your experience. Okay, now here's a fun one. Can you find anything other than your experience? Can you find anyone else's experience?
No.
How many observers are there of your experience? Just you, right? Is there anything else? I mean, here's you looking at the totality of your experience. Is there anything missing? Is there anything that's being chopped off and excluded when you do that? You're the sole inhabitant of your own universe. You're the sole inhabitant of your experience. You're the observer of your experience, and there's nothing outside it, as far as you can tell. There may or may not be, but how could you know? I mean, that's a question. That's like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. The philosophers can debate it, but it's all absurdity because You can't ever go there. You can't ever verify it. So the fact is, you alone exist. And the reality of the universe is the bubble of your experience. I mean, this is self-evident fact. Every 6-month-old baby knows this, right? And I mean, it's all about you, right? Of course, obviously, we all know that. Why? Because there's no one here but you. I mean, there may or may not be others, and they may or may not be like you experiencing, and there's no reason to suppose they aren't, but you can't know that. That's an abstraction. Experientially, you alone exist, and experientially the world is what you find in your experience. And what do you find in your experience, right? Well, as we've explored, you find a lot of weird stuff. You find a lot of stuff that doesn't have a physical correlate. You know, thoughts. Where's thoughts? What's thought made of? How's it come in? What's its dynamism? And then when you start going outside these fields and you get into this sort of very subtle, you know, the equivalent of deep space, intergalactic space of experience, where you start getting into these very subtle experiential fields, they're not nothing. They're not sensory. They're not sense fields. You can't categorize them as vision or thought or hearing or anything like that, but there's qualities there. You can't name them, obviously. At this point, you've gone beyond a human reference point. You've gone beyond anything that can be addressed within the human semantic system, because it's too subtle. You know, it's not part of the repertoire. I'm sure many of you have had the experience of having general anesthesia, for example. When you have general anesthesia, your sense fields are essentially knocked out. But somehow, reality isn't erased, is it? Somehow it's not like it ceases. Time may cease, right? But hey, that's an interesting discovery. So time can cease, but being doesn't cease. You know, I mean, and those of you that haven't had this experience or have had this experience and don't notice that, next time it happens, check it out. Play with it. You know, these kinds of experiences. And of course we all, you know, at least once a day, generally, and for some of us many times a day, we all have the experience of going to sleep and waking up. So, but going to sleep is very, very interesting, right? So what happens, you know? The world sort of loses focus, and what are you orienting towards? You stop orienting towards the world, and at first you're maybe orienting to, you know, body sensations or, you know, thoughts or what have you, but eventually even that sort of loses focus. But it doesn't go to nothing, does it? It doesn't just shut down. It's not like someone turns off the TV. It's like it goes into what? Deep sleep. It's what? Well, it's not nothing. But again, it doesn't have a simple spatial correlation. It doesn't have a simple temporal correlation. It doesn't have a simple functionality, cause and effect correlation. It's a whole different realm, experiential realm. But it's real. We're all in there. We all experience this very directly, you know, every day, generally. And again, sometimes many times a day. That's real too. Of course, in consensus reality, we're waking state chauvinists, right? It's like, no, this is real, that's just sleep, you know. And then dreams are just dreams, but this is real. How can you know that from the point of view of experience? Maybe deep sleep is the real state, and dreams and waking state are deviations from that. In the sense that the waking state we usually hold to be real, and dreams and sleep is a lesser state. I mean, just imagine it's the other way around. Maybe deep sleep is what's really happening, and then somehow this appears within that, and then disappears when we go to sleep, and then the dream appears within that, and then disappears, you know, when the dream stops. Or maybe the dream state's the real state, and then deep sleep and waking condition are deviations from that, right? The point is, it's arbitrary. They're all equally real. Sleep is a real mode of your experiential actuality. And there's absolutely no objective yardstick to measure its position in the hierarchy as being more or less real than the waking state. Now, the waking state, you know, is easily held to be more primal, more actual, because of its relative degree of greater coherence, greater apparent coherence. But that's very strange and slippery too. when you look very, very closely at the waking state, you discover a lot of very strange phenomena. For example, everything is changing instantly. So this seeming stability, this seeming constancy, can't actually be found. Because experientially, every instant you're having an experience you've never had before, you're never going to have again, and the experience is already gone and been replaced. I mean, in subtle and very fine ways. You can look at a chair, you can be hanging out looking at a chair for 5 minutes, and if you really notice, instead of just thinking, oh, the chair's just sitting there, God, I'm getting bored, you know. If you really notice what's happening with your experience, the chair is pulsing, it's breathing, it's tingling, it's dancing. Because there's no chair, there's just the experience of a chair. And experience is intrinsically absolutely dynamic, right? What appears in experience has a zero stability. It may have a kind of a virtual stability, a degree of stability, if you sort of average it out. You know, you can say, well, the deep sleep state is intrinsically much less stable than the waking state. Okay, you can say that relatively. But in the waking state, zero stability can experientially be actually found. Everything is changing and fluctuating and never repeating. So that's very interesting. So this stable world that's just inert and sitting there is a fantasy. You can't find it experientially. It may or may not exist, but since you can't ever know, it's just hypothetical. It's just a concept. Right? And then, okay, let's look at time. Time is really interesting. Well, this is time, you know, here's time, this is now, the future is, you know, we're moving into the future, the past has happened, it's all just like here, it's real, it's solid. Can you find the past? Where's the past? You know, when is it? It's now. It's clearly now, right? And of course it's still now, it's always now. I mean, this is self-evident. You know, it's a complete no-brainer. Yeah, you're always in the present moment. So where's the past? Oh, the past is my memory. I can remember having breakfast this morning. When am I remembering it? I'm remembering it now. Is my memory the breakfast? No. My memory is thought or imagination or whatever. So there's a presence of thought or imagination, which I may be calling of my breakfast, but it's all very strange, it's all slippery, it's all experientially, it's a little different, and in fact a lot different than people may be used to holding it. So when you look at the future, well, the future is what we're moving into. Where's the future? How can you find the future? Well, it'll happen, just wait, you know, in a few minutes it'll be here. And now here's a really fun one. How long is now? How long does the present moment last? You know, maybe about half a second, maybe a quarter of a second, maybe a little less. Maybe it has no duration. Check it out. You know, how long does the circumstance sit around being what it is? It's already gone. As soon as something is exactly a certain way, it's already gone. You watch the hands of a second hand moving. How long is that second hand in any one position? Zero time. Zero time. Not pretty quick or not very long, but zero time. Because by the time it gets to, it's like trying to find a number on a number line. It's getting closer, it's getting closer, it's getting closer, it's going, it's going, it's going, it's going. How long is it actually there? You know, I mean, motion is very interesting. You look at motion. For how long is my hand in any one position? You know, zero time. Literally zero time. Well, how do you stack up a bunch of zeros and end up with something? Well, you don't. I mean, it's Zeno's paradox. You're all familiar with Zeno's paradox. You may not have heard it called that. I can't get to that wall because to get to that wall, I would have to cover half the distance, which would take a finite amount of time. Then I would have to cover half the remaining distance, which would take a finite amount of time. Then I would have to cover half the remaining distance, which would take a finite amount of time. So on and so on and so on and so forth. And you add up a bunch of finites, and it ends up being essentially infinitely long because you're always adding an increment. Even if the increments are getting smaller, you're still adding them. But hey, watch. How can I do that? How did I do that? Because there's no time. And that may sound like a trick. That may sound like sophistry, but play with it. Play with it. It's for real. It's very, very strange. It's very, very strange. There appears to be time. There appears to be, sort of normal spatiality. There appears to be all of these things. But if you look closely, it gets weird. If you look closely, it gets very strange experientially. And there's nothing but experience. Experience is your sole touchstone of verification, right? Because anything you imagine as a standard, or hold to be a standard, is within your experience. So you can't get outside of experience to find a yardstick to hold up to your experience. You can't take something and pick it up and put it out of your experience. So anyway, this has just been a kind of a little journey into noticing some of the aspects of what experience is that, may be slightly alternative to the way that, people ordinarily sit in their experience and hold their experience to be. And the interesting thing about this condition that you actually consist of, the reality of your experiential field, is that it's actual, it's accessible, it's explorable because you are it, and there's absolutely no limit to how profoundly you can be with it because its subtlety is your subtlety. So you go to these to certain aspects of your experience and you go, well, I can't think of that. Well, so don't think of that. Just go there anywhere. You don't need to think about it. Experience is ultimately by direct energy engagement, right? You don't see light by thinking about it. Light is here. And its here-ness is you engaging with it with absolute intimacy, absolute engagement, inconceivable precision. I mean, look, in an instant, and just in real time, in just a bang, a firecracker going off, you perceive everything, all the detail within your field of vision without any effort whatsoever, right? You don't need to add it up, say, wait a minute, there's a flag, there's this. It's not like that. It's just bang, instantly, bang, everything's there like you took a photograph, right? That's power, that's functionality. And your consciousness, your intelligence, or that's just a circumlocution, what you are, which is this astounding consciousness / intelligence / power, effortlessly and spontaneously does that. I mean, how much effort does it take to perceive your experience? Zero. You can't stop it. You don't need to do it. You don't need to try to do it. You can't shut it off, can you? It's absolutely spontaneous. Zero effort to perceive your experience. And all this change that's happening in your experience, you don't need to do it. The hands of the clock move anyway. Your breathing happens anyway. Thought appears anyway. Right? Your body functions happen anyway. So if you look very closely, you're completely off the hook. Because experience is doing itself because of what it is, because of what you are. And that's interesting. So anyway, that's just a little playing around with what's going on here. We can have any discussion if you're interested in talking about anything or whatever.
Well, I'm thinking about what you're saying about experiencing and how kind of amazing it all is, and how we are, how we condition ourselves to sort of have to create sort of we don't think there's a distance between the experience and ourselves, but there is. And sometimes I experiment like with one of my greyhounds, because I love them and I think I'm really connecting with them and seeing them. But if you just stop for a moment, you realize you're not really perceiving that experience of the greyhound. And if you stop for a moment, look into these big brown eyes and sort of experience that consciousness, it almost puts me into like a little panic, because I'm touching something that's kind of generally outside of my experience, you know, and sort of, I think it sort of panics us sometimes, because we're going somewhere. And
it's not outside your experience, it's outside your acknowledgement. We don't usually acknowledge these aspects of what experience actually consists of that are clearly beyond what we hold them to be. I mean, you're not saying anything particular when you say they're beyond. They just are. They're just like, whoa, wait a minute, something's going on here. I don't know what it is, but it's whoa. And because, you know, and this of course is the spiritual challenge, is typically because we are so habituated to orienting towards being with our experience in terms of a frame of reference, a subliminal, unconsciously held frame of reference, which feels like normalcy. We're also in the habit of defining that as normal, safe, non-threatening. We know how to handle it. We know what the ropes are. And so anything that seems to be going outside that is potentially threatening, or potentially, wait a minute, where am I going here? How am I going to function? What's going to happen? My God, I'm opening Pandora's box. You know, it's scary. But it's not that it's actually scary. We don't know whether it's scary. It's just the unknown. But we're afraid it's going to be scary because we have this subliminal mindset that frame of reference is safety. Frame of reference is the known. Frame of reference is kind of home base. And so venturing too far afield could be like a little threatening to that. But with gentle experimentation, you can desensitize yourself. You know, you don't need to scare yourself. Just very gently be with your experience in novel ways. You know, like let's say you do that with your dogs, or do it with the light in the sky. I mean, a very interesting experiment, which is, you know, some of you have probably heard me say this before, is gaze into a clear sky for 5, 10, 20 minutes, half hour, as long as you can stand it. Just relax and just be present with this presence of that experience, and just be with what it's like. Or you can do the same thing with a blank wall. Blank wall is very easy, and you can do it indoors. I mean, up here in Seattle with the inclement weather, that might be better. Do it. Look at a blank wall with it's well illuminated, and just sit for, I mean, don't like meditate or tighten up or anything. Just be with it, relax, and sort of gaze steadily. Don't let your eyes shift around. You'll notice that your focus of attention will spontaneously dance around, but that's one of the things you'll discover, because one of the aspects of that experience consists of is that it tends to present in terms of a relative degree of focus in a field of relative unfocus, with a continual gradient, and this focus is unstable and dynamic. So when you begin to look at your field of vision and just be with what it is, you'll notice that your focus of attention is dancing around. You sort of seeing that, without necessarily shifting your eyes. The same thing happens in hearing sound. I mean, in all experience, it seems to be a sort of a common denominator that one of its major modes is to present in terms of some degree of focus, and within a field of a gradient of lesser focus. And I mean, this is self-evident. It's easy to verify. Look at any one of your experiential fields, and you'll find this phenomenon. But anyway, so look at a blank wall for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Doesn't matter. You don't need to hurt yourself. And if it's nicely illuminated, that's great. And just see what the experience of this presence is. And you will discover directly some subtleties of the phenomena. You'll discover the dynamism of experience. That the wall you'll think someone dosed you with LSD or something. The wall will be dancing, it'll be sparkling, it'll be moving around, there'll be sort of patterns appearing. You'll notice the dynamism of the field of focus spontaneously dancing around. You'll notice all of this liveliness in something that we may be used to holding as, it's just a blank wall, it's just sitting there, it's boring, And you notice the actual experience of the actuality of that is anything but boring. It's profoundly entertaining. It's a light show, It's just astounding. And you can look. I mean, in this example, it uses the field of vision, but you can play similar explorations with any aspect of experience, and you will discover essentially similar phenomena. That what experience actually is in real time, is very interesting. It's very live. It's very lively. It's very intelligent. It's very dynamic. It's absolutely unstable. It's meaningful. It's profoundly meaningful in irrational ways, in ways that you can't prove or describe why they're meaningful or what's meaningful about it. But nonetheless, it's intelligent. It's meaningful. It's vital. It's alive somehow. So on and so forth. But then, so you do these kind of general experiments, just within the degree of your level of comfort, and it's basically like a desensitization therapy. You gradually become desensitized to the idea that being with your experience in any non-normal way is threatening, because you have the experience and, well, it wasn't so bad. Gosh, I looked at the wall and it was dancing around and nothing bit me or nothing blew up, or it was kind of fun, in fact. And then gradually you can go farther and farther afield, but again, stay within your comfort zone.
It's almost like a reflexive, because you don't want to feel that way. When you're getting close to something, there's sort of like, I think, a reflexive pulling back. And I just always wonder if that's, to use the term, maybe the sort of, again, the ego and our condition that's constantly trying to keep us all patched up together.
It's fear. It's fear, feeling threatened, safety, the idea, the fantasy that there is something to defend, and the fantasy that there's something to defend it against, all of which is at the core of these kinds of ego structures. But again, by this kind of desensitization, you very gently explore whether or not is that really the case. Is there anything that's really that threatening? Is there anything that's being threatened? Is anything being undermined here? Other than the fact of you're kind of boldly going, you're letting yourself notice. Yeah, well, wow, I'm actually going into some place I've never really consciously been, and gee, it's not so bad. In fact, it's kind of fun. And again, there may be this kind of defensiveness or fear aspect in us, but here you are at this talk. So you're a complex system. You're not strictly oriented to that, or you wouldn't be here. You'd be home watching TV or drinking beer or whatever, right? But you're motivated to come to a talk like this, so you're not wholly orienting to the security and the dullness of normalcy. You're pushing your own envelope intrinsically, so you have that motivation in you.
I actually just want to ask your advice, because I know that you've talked about this kind of doing these incremental ways of just playing around with experience, and
sure.
I really get that. And what, like right now, what seems apparent in my life is that it's really turbulent. Like, like the place that we were going to live completely fell apart. And so where we thought we were going in 3 weeks is gone. And we're scrambling around looking for a place to live, and I won't have a job in 3 weeks. And it just, everything, and I wake up at night and I can't sleep, and I'm watching myself do this. I'm watching how crazy my thoughts are going.
Right.
I mean, they're just like, it's like they're on meth. They're just like,
sure.
And yet I can't seem to, well, that's not always true. Sometimes I feel kind of level with it. But sometimes I just don't. I'm like, what the hell? And so thinking
Something you don't want.
I just don't feel like I feel like what I want to do is just make it go away.
Right. Okay.
And that doesn't work.
Right.
Because here it is. And I guess I just, for these times when I wish that I could do it incrementally by staring at a wall, but apparently right now it's just I'm being pushed into the deep end of the pool,
sure.
or what feels like my deep end.
Sure.
how you would suggest approaching that in terms of.
Sure. Well, every aspect of that whole narrative you just described exists in your imagination alone. I'm not saying it's not true as far as it goes, but it exists in your imagination. Like here you are sitting here. You're here. It's now. That's always going to be true. Your job is an abstraction. If this was your job, you would be here and it would be now, and you can call it a job. And then when 5 o'clock rolls around or whatever, the equivalent is in your particular field, all of a sudden it's not your job, but you're still here and now. So calling it job versus not job is very heavy-handed, qualifying, which doesn't actually touch the actuality of experience. You will be here and it will be now, whether you have a job. Here what looks like will always be different. The moment here looks just like this. Actually, right now it looks different already. But it will look more overtly different. You leave the room and obviously it looks very different. You go someplace else, it looks very different. We qualify it, this is mine, this is not mine. I can stay here, I can't stay here. I'm having to leave this, I'm having to not leave. All of that is essentially imaginary qualification of a condition which is absolutely constant, which is you're here now. Be here now, wow. Sounds like a book title. I'll make $1 million. So again, and it's not that that's not happening, and it's not that you don't have to grapple with it, because in fact it is occurring, so it's part of your functioning to have all this shit, that you're engaging with. But it's actually a superficial overlay. And these kinds of experimentations I'm talking about will reveal that. And if you're too caught up to dabble with that now, then so be it. That may be so. And certainly, that may be the case for the majority of people.
Probably have 5 minutes to look at the wall.
Exactly.
That was a little overdramatic.
Yeah. Sure. Or, just when you go to sleep at night. I mean, every night, more or less, you're going to be going to sleep-ish.
Yeah.
Right? And, going to sleep is just a fabulous vehicle for experiential investigation. Watch the way the world gradually disappears. Watch the way orienting to a physical body disappears. Watch the way orienting to a personality disappears. And yet, reality doesn't disappear. It gets very different textually. It gets very relatively subtle. I mean, it's obviously arbitrary and inaccurate to classify how it gets in any way at all. But it gets weird. It gets different. But it's not nothing. It doesn't stop, and it's just as much you as this here now is you, even though it looks very, very, very different. I mean, that's the underlying formula that is always true about what you are, about what this is, this condition here, this actuality, this reality. It always looks different. Never repeats itself. But it never departs from itself. It's always exactly itself. And this is always the case. Believe it or not, even on your deathbed, you're going to find the same thing. It's going to look really different. But it's not going to disappear. It can't disappear, because it's not really here. which may be a bit of a leap, but in fact it's discoverable directly.
Yeah, I think I'm just really frustrated at how powerful that
of course it is. We're junkies. We're psychotic. We're crazy people. We've gone over to the dark side. We're completely seduced and powerless in this abstraction of our frame of reference and our imagination, and holding it as if it wasn't, not letting ourselves see its imagination, holding it as if it was objectively true, and then with all the reactivity that's associated with that. We're junkies, It's not an easy. It's like a lifelong alcoholic getting him to give up drinking. It's not necessarily easily done. It's not like, well, just stop drinking. It's like, yeah, okay, sounds good. So this is why, it demands something. It demands inspiration. It demands edginess. It demands cussedness. It demands obsession. It demands urgency, or it just demands luck. Just having the right personalities, circumstances, and apparent external circumstances line up in such a way that somehow you said, yeah, this is it, now I'm going to do it. Now I'm going to like really, start to play with this, start to extricate myself from it for real. Because it is real. It's real that that is not reality. It's real that that is imaginary. It's not denying those actualities and denying the need to take care of them, but those actualities aren't those actualities as you hold them to be, and taking care of them is not taking care of them as you hold it to be. Taking care of them consists of you being here now. When you're paying bills, what's happening? You're here now. And all this functioning that happens spontaneously. We think I have to pay bills, let me find a pen and my checkbook and to do. But that's more imagination. In actuality, needing to pay the bills appears spontaneously. The urge to finally decide to pay them, or saying fuck it and going out and having a beer, happens spontaneously. And then you pick up the pen and it happens spontaneously. Pick up the checkbook, it happens spontaneously. Start writing checks, or you get distracted and give it up and say, well, fuck it, I'll do it later. Happens spontaneously. And the whole thing, but we think, I'm doing this. Ramana Maharshi is quoted as saying that the entire spiritual dilemma revolves around the issue of doership, the fantasy of doership. And if you look very closely at what appears in your experience, you will discover that it all happens spontaneously.
Yeah, and that's part of my frustration is that when quite often I have the sense of I'm not doing anything. I'm just, I don't know, something is doing.
Sure, shit happens. Shit happens, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's this continual, it is like you said, going to the dark side. It just feels like, why
insanity.
Is that suffering?
Acknowledge that you're a crazy person.
Okay.
We're all crazy people. Humans are crazy. Humans are insane. And the point isn't to cure it, just acknowledge it. It's like, okay, I'm a crazy person. It's like an alcoholic, Don't stop being an alcoholic, just own up to it, cowboy up. It's like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic. Okay, cool, now what? Well, there's the bar, there's AA, there's whatever. Mm-hmm. But at least you're in a different place than when no, I'm not an alcoholic. It's like, I'm a crazy person. Hi, I'm Peter, I'm insane.
Yeah.
And so that's right there is that's a big step. That's a frame of reference. It's like, gosh, and my insanity is this tendency to jump into these bizarre orientations towards imagination as if they were actual.
That actually really resonated with me, what you just said.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, I'm fucking nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I don't need to worry about it.
You don't need to worry about it. You don't even need to fix it. Just see it, and just seeing it is huge. It changes everything.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you can kind of work. It's the elephant in the room. You can work around it. You can actually acknowledge it and function with that within that context, rather than because you get blindsided when you don't acknowledge it.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a layer of the insanity is that, and I'm not supposed to be insane.
All of that. It's endlessly recursive and about itself, and it's just, oh my God, we're all very familiar with this, of course. It's, human psychology. Welcome to the nut house. There's just a misunderstanding of how profound and ubiquitous it is. Because, ordinarily we'll define, mental problems as being slight deviation from normalcy. But the true mental problem is orienting towards frames of reference. Because all frames of reference are inaccurate, are partial, are not true. They may be partially true, but partially true is a synonym for wholly wrong. And we don't know it. People don't. That's a very alien concept to people. It's like, what do you mean? Nothing I can think is accurate? If you tell most people that, they'll, you just end up in endless arguments. But it's self-evidently the fact that reality cannot be captured in concepts accurately. You can kind of you can argue that you're averaging it and it's approximately true or it's largely true, and okay, maybe. But again, largely true is a synonym for wholly inaccurate. A myth is as good as a mile. Yeah. I mean, this is the point. So the reality check, real reality check is, my ideas of this are not this. The map is not the terrain. It just isn't. No matter how good your map is, it's not the terrain. It isn't. Oh, but it's a good map and it's useful. Okay, maybe, but it's not the terrain. And here's the terrain. The terrain's available. You can be with the terrain itself, so why all this screwing around with maps and getting all bent out of shape about it? Because you discover some very interesting things when you engage with the terrain directly, when you engage with experience directly as it is. All sorts of very interesting possibilities and doors open that are totally unexpected because, of course, they can't be imagined because they can't be conceived. Because experience is not by conceiving of it. Experience is by direct experiential energy engagement. Let's call it. I mean, to make up a phrase. Experience is not an idea. It's a transcendental actuality. And this is it. Here you are. You're doing it. It's already happening. So you may or may not be crazy, but you're being crazy in a context of not craziness. You're being crazy in a context of total reality, which is right here, and you're always totally accessing it, so it's available. It's 11. Shall we take a 5-minute break and stretch our legs or get some tea or whatever? Okay, we're back-ish. One very nice aspect of the way this turns out to be that is contrary to a lot of spiritual philosophy is it turns out that you don't need to fix anything to get this. A lot of spiritual paths and practices and philosophies have implication that to various degrees you have to learn how to not think, or learn how to be detached from your emotions, or learn how to this, that, or the other, and basically refine yourself to one, or change yourself to one degree or another before you're fit or able to be with this as it is. And it turns out, I assert, that's not the case at all. The only thing, like we were talking earlier about, the human nature is to be insane. And you don't need to stop being insane. You don't need to fix the insanity. You just need to see it, see what it is. And that's the master formula for all this. It's not about changing anything. It's just about seeing what it is, what it already is, what it always has been, and what it always will be. And that is what realization consists of. And it's completely transforming without changing anything. Very paradoxically.
Peter, that's seeing, that's a pretty big thing.
It's very big, but in one sense, but in another sense, it's a complete non-entity because you're in fact always seeing. It's more, let's say, recognizing or acknowledging. And again, in some ways, it's a very, very slight thing, even though in implication and experientially, it's a huge thing. So, but it's very strange and slippery the way that works.
When you were talking about breathing happens. We're not thinking about it or doing it, or our blood circulates, it's happening, and not having to do anything. And then we get to thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it is actually just happening.
Of course. Try and stop thinking for a while, and you'll see how spontaneously it's happening.
Completely frustrated is that there's this, but there is no there. It does just happen.
Mm-hmm. Everything does. Even
Why is it we get so trapped up in thought, though, and we don't get trapped up in breathing? We don't get trapped in the, oh my God, am I going to breathe? And is this going to happen?
Some people do, actually.
Yeah. But thought is just so overwhelming, and so it seems not something that, it seems like we're supposed to have control over. Like Ann was saying,
Right.
I should be. There are times when I feel like, okay, I got a handle on this, but it's either getting away from or trying to be something.
Yeah. But you see, all of that, it's a quirk of human psychology or human nature or whatever. It's a quirk of of the systems that we happen to be, that we have a proclivity to do this. We have a proclivity to give thought more power than it actually has by attributing to thought the power of abstraction. And the power of abstraction is a complete fallacy. In other words, you're thinking a thought, it's very easy to think the thought is about something. And that is entirely untrue. There's no such thing as about. When a thought happens, it means that the thought is happening. It's not about anything. Now, it's subtle because in some ways you can say, yeah, but thought can be functional and part of process and part of functioning and so on. And that's certainly true. But the way in which that's true is strange and subtle, not surprisingly, because everything is strange and subtle, as opposed to heavy-handedly, grossly obvious, like, oh, I'm thinking about this, and it's the map is not the terrain kind of thing. And it's easy to mistake how absolute and how profound that is the case. It's easy to think that, well, the map's not the terrain, but it's pretty close. It's not. It's not. This is so, what this actually is so nonlinear, so weird, so completely beyond anything that could be humanly conceived, that no matter how accurate a map you have of it, it's just not going to go there. It's not going to address it. So you might say, yeah, but engineers can learn mathematics and can build bridges, and bridges happen. And yeah, all of that is the case, but it doesn't actually work the way you think it is. The bridge doesn't happen because the engineers did their math and thought about it, believe it or not. The thinking about it and doing the math is an aspect of a process, all of which consists of actually direct energy engagement, and all of which is doing itself spontaneously. Rocket to the moon happened because it happened, not because great engineers learned math. Great engineers learning math is describable as an aspect of that process, but the entire process, every step of the way, was a spontaneous, called direct energy engagement. From the motivation, where's the motivation? Say you're an engineer, you do math. Where does the motivation to learn math and be an engineer come from? It's not being done on purpose. It appears mysteriously. And then when you're doing the math and you're learning the math, what's really happening? Well, you can't say. It's this here now in its functioning, which is entirely beyond description. So I may say, no, I'm in a classroom, I'm taking graduate level, engineering, mathematics or something. That's a spin doctoring of something that is entirely beyond that. That's a transcendental experiential energy field that is absolutely undescribable. No, I'm in a classroom and I'm learning math. That's what you say. I say it's the miracle of divine presence doing what it does in the way that it does it undescribably.
And how powerful the doer is. No, I'm doing it.
Well, it's a claim. The doer is powerful, but the doer isn't the you that's saying I'm doing that. And yet, paradoxically, you are doing it, because what's really doing it is what you really are. Even though the you that you think you are that's claiming to do it, it's wholly inaccurate. So it's all very slippery and multidimensional. Endless weirdness.
I often think about that we drive around and we live our lives and we do all these things, and you sort of think, we even get a little bit bored with it sometimes. And because we think of it as sort of normal, and we've got it all measured out and organized, and and this is how the cars run, this is when you go home, you make it and you do whatever. But I try and challenge myself to sort of think, if I was some sort of other consciousness that was just sort of dropped in the middle of all this, and I'd never seen it, or I'd be going, oh my God, it would be just like crazy.
Sure. I mean, what does an amoeba think of that? What does an amoeba think of you driving a car?
Yeah. What does he even think?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a bit. It is a challenge. It's frustrating in a way to sort of drop those preconceptions and
Yeah.
abstractions.
But again, you don't even need to drop them. You just need to see them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you know, it's a lazy man's, or, you know, not to be gender biased, it's a lazy person's, you know, joy. It turns out to be the case that you don't need to change anything. You just need to see what it actually is. So you don't need to stop abstracting. You don't even need to stop being lost in abstraction. You just need to see that as that call it event as it actually is, which is essentially a miraculous presence of this.
Yeah.
I mean, I call it radiant presence.
Having lived with all these abstractions for so long, they become very ignorant. What I'm doing, I have this little phrase, I just say it's just this.
Yeah.
And I found that when things are beautiful and lovely and joyous and whatever, it's so much easier to do that and be here. But the other day I felt really miserable and I had to go to the park with the dog. I apologize for always talking about these. I do have a life other than these dogs.
So you say.
But I do say, but you know, I do have some really beautiful experiences at this beautiful park. And so the other day I felt so miserable, but I had to take them to the park because they had to run around a bit. And I had a headache, I was nauseous, my heart was, I thought maybe I'm having a heart attack because I was having this irregular heartbeat. And I thought, yeah, but the dogs need to go to the park, so I won't go to the doctor, right? And I felt really horrible. And then I just thought, well, if I can apply it's just this to all the lovely walking through the, you know, being by the lake, I can do it when I'm feeling like crap and my head's in. And I did that. I just said, you know, it's just this. You know, the headache. And sure enough, the headache got less because I didn't put any narrative on the pain or the discomfort. There was no narrative there. There was no discussion about it. It was just this.
Sure.
And
Narrative has the subjective effect of concretizing conditions.
yeah.
And the challenge is that most narrative happens unconsciously, so we don't know we're doing it. But in actual fact, any experience completely transcends what you're holding it to be when you look at what's actually present. A headache completely stops being a headache when you stop holding it as being a headache.
Yeah.
And holding it as being a headache is a subconscious defining. A headache is endless weirdness. A headache is like an astounding light show. You know, it can be experienced as that because it is that. You know, it completely transcends. Every experience transcends any particular way of being, and transcends that, and transcends that, and transcends that, just in its actual present actuality. So a headache is more than a headache, and more than that, and more than that, and more than that. And you can surf that experientially as far as you want to go, and it literally stops being a headache real early on, and it just becomes an amazing, you know, intergalactic voyage in no time. And every and any condition is the same thing. And it's all down to just discovering what the experience actually consists of, what this actually is, what it already is. You're not, you know, creating something new or even experiencing something you're not already experiencing. You're just letting yourself experience what you have always been experiencing. I mean, that's why earlier I just kind of defined it as breaking through the barrier between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. Unconsciously, you are experiencing all that stuff. Unconsciously, you're completely free of headaches. You know, not that headaches don't happen, but unconsciously, there's so much more than that. You know, everything is so much more than everything. But the unconscious is very nonlinear, irrational, strange, multidimensional, internally paradoxical, and so on and so forth. But hey, so is reality, so it's kind of nice to be able to tap into that mode of being with it.
Is the unconsciousness an abstraction, though?
Well, it is as a way of describing it, but functionally, it seems it's a functional actuality to the extent to the extent you're cut off from it, to the extent you're locked into, an interpretive or frame of reference way of orienting your experience. You're not letting yourself acknowledge the ways in which you're experiencing your experience that are completely beyond that frame of reference. And in actual fact, you are experiencing your experience completely beyond any frame of reference, no matter how exotic it may be that you're oriented to. You already are. Because experience itself is infinitely multidimensional. Not as an abstraction, it really is that. And you're experiencing all of it already as that. So it's not, so again, it's not a matter of developing a new faculty. It's just a matter of letting yourself relax into what is already the case and acknowledge it. Acknowledge the weirdness, the strangeness. Because, these nonlinear modes, these irrational modes, are very strange from the point of view of a rational, logical, analytical mind. Because that mode of logic just can't go there. It's out of its depth. It's like, logic, where things are either this or that, can't go to a place where, yeah, they're this, they're that, they're kind of not this, they're not that, and they're none of the above all at once, with no contradiction at all.
It's like physics with a wave and particle.
Yeah, sure, exactly so, exactly. I mean, physicists in science went through this same dilemma scientifically that I'm proposing psychologically or experientially. My master was his paradigm for all this was not spirituality. His paradigm was parapsychology, and he several times he told me, parapsychology is 90% psychology. So spirituality is really about our insanity. It's about our tendency to orient to our experience through addiction to these analytical modes.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
And again, it's not like you need to even stop doing that. You just need to see that that's the case, and see that that is happening in a context which completely is not that. So analysis is happening in a context which is not analysis. Like our little experiment this morning, analytical thought is happening. Sure, I'm thinking about things, and this, that's a clock, and this is a wall, and this is a cup, and blah, blah, blah. But that's happening in a context that's wholly beyond that. These experiential colors, the texture of light, the texture of sound, that's completely not addressable conceptually, and yet it's actually present, completely evidently and obviously and accessibly. So it's just a matter of, letting yourself be with what is actually present, and then you will discover, because experience is vast and conceptual analysis is tiny. It's a very small subsystem. It's like my computer has all these systems and applications in it, but there's this one little subsystem, it's a clock, and it's always displaying the time in the top right-hand corner. That's analogous to what the analytical mind is like. It's a tiny little subset in this sea of weirdness. Have you all seen this picture? I think it's many hundreds of years old anyway. I don't know if it's medieval or not. There's a famous woodcut, or I think of it as famous anyway, of a guy who's there's some kind of man, a philosopher or something, and he's got beard and robes, and he's sort of perched on a little world, kneeling down, and he's poking his head on. There's a sphere of the sky in this woodcut. He's poking his head through the sphere of the sky. And he's looking, and there's all these weird circles within circles and shapes outside. Has any of you seen that?
No, I haven't seen it.
I wish I had. Anyway, it's an absolutely lovely illustration of this, of the sort of the orderly world is this small subset in vast irrational chaos, and we're experiencing all of it, but somehow we succeed in having this bizarre, essentially perverse mechanism of not letting ourselves notice that.
We're all narcissists, really.
Oh, sure.
It's,
Well, yeah, we're all completely obsessed with our personality.
yeah.
Egotists. And our worldview and our rightness, and whatever we say we think, we really think, I'm right.
Oh, yeah.
I'm right. I've got it down.
Yeah.
And again, it's not a matter of stopping doing that or dismantling it. Just see that the fact that is a tiny subsystem in this vast chaos, or calling it chaos, is from the point of view of the analytic mind. It's not a chaos. It's a sublime, inconceivable, hyper-intelligent order, but it's a multidimensional, infinite order that looks like chaos to rationality.
Yeah, I tend to look in the other direction, so to speak. You're talking about analysis being in this vast field, which is true. But I've gone, I get mental calm, you might say, by going into analytic thing to the extent that, for example, I discovered scared geometry a while back. People call it sacred geometry. I call it scared. But anyway, if you go back to the origin of sacred geometry, you have a mathematical point which doesn't exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But everything is based upon that.
Sure.
And if we look at this chaos around us, which is, I think, beautifully illustrated on the net in a video of the expansion and contraction of the what is it? The set of all sets, the Mandelbrot set, right? You can go infinitely into this set and infinitely out of the set, and it remains, beautiful and inconceivable.
Sure. Yeah.
So I just like to go back to that point and use it as a reference point for my universe. And,
Sure.
And then when I go back from that nothing to what is, it's more fun.
Hey,
But then nothing's
double your pleasure, double your fun, by all means.
Because I struggle with that nothing concept.
But nothing is a concept. Nothing doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So that's, yeah,
What
what's
this
that?
is beyond something and nothing and everything. It's D, none of the above. And yet it's an inclusive D, none of the above, not a none of the above that cancels out those subsets.
So
This is more than something, more than nothing, more than both something and nothing, more than neither something or nothing, and even more than D, none of the above.
and so
It's infinitely weird, but yet it is what it is. It's actual.
it's ludicrous to even begin to try and figure it out.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, because it's,
That's the point. But you don't need to figure it out because here it is.
here it is.
You
Yeah,
have
it's
it.
experience.
You have it, and there's no limit to how profoundly you can explore it and be with it. Because you have the capability, because you are irrational hyperintelligence, because this is irrational hyperintelligence, and you are it. This is you. This field of experience is you. It's what you are. So everything that it's throwing at you is just your intentional nature showing up, appearing. So you have the capability to be with it in astoundingly irrational, yet astoundingly hyper-intelligent ways. Because you already are. It's already happening. It's just a matter of letting yourself notice that. So, there's a lot of ways letting yourself notice it sounds like something. It's not like that. That's just sort of a trick. It's like Alice through the looking glass, it's just, these are all metaphors. And yet, it can be an experiential actuality, but this is doable. You can be with your experience as it actually is, simply by noticing that you are being with your experience as it actually is, and it makes absolutely no sense.
You can be, you have the capability. You said that, but practical matter, like you were saying last night, realization is a rather rare thing.
It seems to be very strange.
Yeah. So is it dependent on?
It's like fish not finding water.
So is it dependent on luck? It's like capability. That's like it's sort of like, well, yeah, you could do it, but how many actually do?
Don't know. It doesn't seem to be many, as far as I can see, and I don't understand that at all. But hey, I'm chipping away at it.
But what is the definition
Best I
of
can.
that?
Well, you can't. There's no definition of anything. That's the point.
Yeah, what is realization?
Realization is an actuality. But what it is can't be said because, you can say a lot about it. I can say a lot about it. Realization is my favorite occult philosopher said that realization is acquiring the extent of your body. Acquiring the extent of your body. Your full experiential field is actually your embodiment. We're used to thinking this is my body. But in actuality,
Oh, quite an extent of it.
in actuality, the full experiential field, exactly as it is your embodiment, is your manifestation. And it is infinite and endlessly subtle and endlessly weird. And you are, in fact, experiencing all of it right now and always have been. And it's possible to notice that that is the fact. And that realization it consists of essentially the fact or accomplishment, the fait accompli of that noticing this full field that you actually are. And that paradoxically you are already noticing and have always been noticing. So, how the miracle isn't realization, the miracle is how possibly could non-realization happen? How can delusion happen? How can we be sucked into this seeming smallness when we're this vast, infinite openness?
Well, this is a question that sort of puzzled me, because I think, can't one have a realization where that occurs, for whatever moment in time or moments in time, that occurs, and there is this seeing of the extent, and then it's sort of as if it collapses again.
Sure.
And then you're in your limited.
Right, but that's not actual realization. That's a partial realization.
Yeah, well,
because
that's what
actual realization is realizing that realization itself expands and contracts. Realization from itself.
When you think it's contracted, realization is knowing that it's
that's reality too. Reality can present as contracted. Reality can present as diluted. That's one of reality's major modes, as we all know, right? So delusion is a mode of reality, and in realization, delusion is not a problem. Delusion is not a loss of anything. Delusion is just, one of the 38 flavors or whatever.
I get it.
So when losing it isn't losing it, that's what realization is.
Or thinking it.
When insanity isn't insanity. Well, thinking you lost it can happen too, but that's
You
not.
lost it, but you haven't lost it.
Of course, how can you lose it? How can reality be lost? How can actuality be lost? Actuality as it is reality. It's the totality of reality. It's the totality of your being, and it's the totality of your experiential field. Already, that's just a statement of fact. And noticing that that's the case, or not noticing that that's the case, are modes of reality itself. So reality itself is never lost. I mean, it's all very slippery. It's all very strange. That it can seem to be lost is the weirdness. That delusion can seem to happen when it hasn't actually happened is the weirdness.
So,
It's like I said, it's like hypnosis or something. It's like how can a hypnotist get you to cluck like a chicken on stage? It's not like he tells you to do it and you're in some kind of collusion with him. It's just some kind of a bizarre mechanism, a quirk of our mental nature or something that this can happen.
There's some kind of way you're locked on that I'm not locked on.
Sure,
Like
maybe.
Yeah.
But locking on
But
is...
there's nothing to lock onto, I know that, but
Right.
I'm just going to put it that way.
Right. I would say it's the other way around.
Click.
I would say it's the other way around.
I'm locked onto multiple things and you're not locked on at all.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be
No,
interesting
but
to
there is a
explore.
very either-or feel to it.
Yes, I agree. There is an either-or feel to it, which is very strange and paradoxical because it's not actually either-or. That it seems to be that is how...
True, but I've experienced both sides of it.
I know, for sure,
And it
yeah.
does really feel like either.
No, it's for real. It's for real. The difference between seeing this as it is and not seeing this as it is huge, and yet at the same time it's absolutely nothing. So it's very weird. Trying to make sense of delusion, realization, the spiritual path is a fool's game.
Yeah.
Because it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all weirdness. It's all,
Yeah. Well,
And
God
yet-
says it's there for the delivered mind. I mean, if you're not delivered, then,
Sure, you could say that, yeah.
yeah.
But what that consists of is very strange.
Yeah.
And it's very subtle. And the dividing line between delusion and realization is essentially non-existent. They're actually the same condition. And seeing that is the case is what realization looks like.
Yes, and we can have, being that I'm on the side of not being realized,
Well, you say that, you claim that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
In what context do you claim that?
In the context
This is, I mean,
of
this
having been
is here,
realized
right?
and having had a kind of a unfiltered clarity
Sure,
ongoing
sure.
that I would say I don't have now.
Right. But you're not having it now. It's happening in the context of what? I mean, real time. What else is going on besides you're not having clarity? What's the context of your not having clarity occurring within?
Well, the first thing I go to is that the pressure, it feels to me that the pressure to have some kind of consensus shared reality with the other people in my life is big.
Okay, sure. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, how can you have a shared reality? All you can really do is pretend to have a shared reality. You don't know what you don't know what things look like to them. I mean, they say it looks like X, Y, Z, and you may say the words it looks like X, Y, Z, so your words may agree, but you may wear the same kind of clothes.
Yeah.
But that doesn't. Does that really translate into an actual parallelness or sameness or anything?
No.
It's just a ritualization. It's a supposition.
Yeah, so it feels like there's something even deeper there.
Sure.
Something even deeper that I'm not talking. I was scared shitless when it happened.
Very typical. I ended up in a mental institution for 5 weeks when it happened. First to me.
Did you?
Yeah.
I could see that happening, like some people saying then. So, I mean, how do you stay clear of that now?
Well, I learned to keep low profile.
Yeah.
I can smile and nod and not shoot guns at people and keep my pants on when I'm in public and things like that.
Yeah.
It's an effort, but I can do it.
More than St. Francis did. Yeah.
But, as one matures with what this is, one discovers that it does not dictate or necessitate any particular mode of behavior or otherwise. So, it's just as easy to behave within the bounds of normalcy as not, and nothing is gained or lost by doing so. It's convenient. You keep yourself out of jail and mental institutions and from people stoning you and such, or nailing you to crosses and such, has happened from time to time. But you don't lose anything by doing that. When one is more immature, one thinks like, oh my God, I've seen reality. Let me go out and yell it on the street corner, and then you get locked up, and people think you're weird.
I just found a lot of stuff coming out of my mouth that I didn't even expect would be, and
Sure.
people kind of looking stunned when they looked at me.
Well, everything comes out of my mouth I have no expectation of, and yet somehow it seems to,
It's working okay for you.
I don't know. I guess so. I mean, at the moment, I seem to stifle myself sufficiently, except when I'm in these kinds of environments where it's kind of expected or invited.
Yeah.
But a lot of that it comes from familiarity. As one becomes familiar with being what one actually is, then there's not much implication. It's like, okay, yeah, okay, cool. This is infinite, transcendental, divine presence. And now what? Well, gee, let's go to lunch. What's on TV?
Yeah.
Because and this is and a lot of this has to do with contrast. A lot of spiritual ecstasy and a lot of the kind of the wow factor of spirituality isn't so much about reality itself as the contrast when one moves from a limited frame of reference into the actuality of this. The contrast is huge, and it's like, whoa! hold the phone. This is for real, you know.
Yeah.
But that's an artifact of the contrast. And then after you get there, well, this is normalcy, and in fact, it's always even been this. Then it's like, okay, now what? You know, wow. Okay, I can say wow anytime. Wow. I can say it and mean it, because fucking wow.
Yeah.
But I don't need to be saying wow every second.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, you could say it's a matter of acclimatization or something like that, or familiarity or something. But it's really just that the impact is more about the transition, the contrast,
Right.
than it is about
Yeah, that's
the condition itself.
Yeah.
You know, multidimensional transcendentality, let's call it, is actually your normal condition, always has been and always will be. And so it actually feels very familiar. This is just same old, you know. But it's an infinite, transcendental, divine same old, as opposed to some limited, stifled, imaginary same old that one may be used to orienting towards.
Yeah, it's like getting chucked out of a box that doesn't have any light in it.
Yeah, sure. At first you're blinded by the light, but after you've been there for an hour or a day or a week or a month or a year, it's just like, well, okay, nothing's a light, you know. Where's my sunglasses?
Yeah, one teacher did say to me, and it was very useful, and it was early on, it was kind of like, well, you get used to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because again, the weirdness is much more in the contrast than it is in the condition itself.
Right.
Because relative to, you know, a diminished frame of reference, which is sort of called human normalcy, what this actually is, you know, oh my fucking God, this is, wow, all these amazing, astounding sacred books were absolutely true, and in fact they were, if anything, they were understating it,
Yes.
you know. And when you see that, it's like, you know,
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just looking for something that would kind of anchor me.
yeah,
There was like
sure,
no anchor.
no anchor,
No point that's
bottomless.
moving. No little rabbit's foot.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
infinite
no
free
goals.
fall, absolute infinity.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, but when you get that, and yeah, absolute infinity still is, you know, and you go to bed and it's absolute infinity, you go to sleep and it's absolute infinity, and you dream and it's absolute infinity, and you wake up and it's absolute infinity, and this cycle sort of continues like usual, and then it's breakfast time and you choose between the eggs Benedict or the fried eggs, and then we have some friends call you up and invite you over to something or other, and you decide whether you want to go, and all this stuff happens. And yeah, it's absolute infinity. It is, it really is. But it also looks like that. You know, that description doesn't contain it. It isn't actually that. But it refers to this actuality that is, you know, so why different? I mean, you know, some traditions make a big deal out of contrasting or juxtaposing the absolute and the relative. But the relative is just a signpost to the actual. You know, it's pointing at the moon. So I say that's the moon, and that's not the moon. It is what it is. But I'm saying that's the moon, and I can say that's the moon. That doesn't diminish it from what it is. And so I can say, oh, you know, my friends called me up and invited me for lunch. I'm deciding whether not to go. That doesn't make that description accurate. Because the true description of what's actually happening really is. And that's obvious and palpable and completely undisguisable, except for the quirks of our psychology that seem to so successfully disguise it. But again, we're crazy people. You know, when you get that humans are insane, then all of a sudden, in a way, that makes a lot of sense. It explains a lot. It's like, oh, I'm psychotic. Oh, okay. Suddenly that explains so much. It's literally true. You know, delusion is psychosis. It's, you know, I don't know the technical. I know shit about psychology formally, but I would define insanity as holding something that is not real as being real, holding something that is not a certain way as if it was that way. You know, if I'm convinced that I'm Napoleon, and I really, I'm Napoleon, then I'm a nutcase, right? I'm insane. If I'm convinced I'm a small human being stuck in a body in a material universe, It's just like being Napoleon. It really is. And this is palpable, it's observable, it's self-evident. It's not even a leap. I mean, it's just a matter of get real with yourself, get honest with what your experience is actually telling you. Look at what your experience actually conveys, the implications of what experience actually consists of in real time. I mean, just really actually, not thinking about it, but just what is this? And it shows what it is very clearly. And it does not conform to our descriptions of it. The descriptions kind of fit roughly and superficially in some very approximate ways, but they get left by the wayside real early on if you're looking closely. And there's no limit to how closely you can look at it. Experience is endlessly fine, and perceiving intelligence is endlessly fine. So you can really be with this. There's no limit to how subtly you can be with this. And again, it's kind of a, sort of training in it, so to speak, or practice. It's really just a matter of sensitivity training. It's really just a matter of be with the subtlety. Experience is really subtle. I mean, it's also gross and obvious in many ways, but even the gross and obviousness is itself subtle. So here's, for example, here's color present, really obvious, very gross. Color everywhere. Anyone that's not colorblind or they can, not vision impaired is experiencing colors. It's a no-brainer, very obvious and coarse. But then, what is color? What is the actual experience of color? And all of a sudden you get into this subtlety of nuance and dimensionality, and it gets very non-verbal very rapidly. It gets very irrational. It's really interesting experiential texture and presence and qualities. And even saying that is like, what does that mean? But again, the actuality doesn't need words. And in fact, words can't capture it anyway, so who cares? So you leave words by the wayside and be with the subtlety. And then take a step further, be even more subtle. Come into color even more. And color stops being color after a while. It just gets, because experience, the very nature of experience is that there's no bottom to how subtly, how deeply you can go into any portion of it. And you go into any portion of it and you ultimately find the same thing. You find experience. You never find anything other than experience. Go into your field of vision, and where you end up with is experience. Go into your field of thought, and you end up with experience. Not surprisingly. And so on and so forth. But anyway, all of this description is inaccurate. but hopefully it's evocative.
I was wondering about memory.
Yeah, memory's a good one.
And how it doesn't seem to be held in the brain, actually.
Sure.
That's just a processing. But it's, I wanted to ask, is it in a cloud? To me, it seems like there's a cloud of something out there, especially around people. There are clouds of things that can be accessed, about memory, about experience, about,
So are you asking about spatial orientation? Or I'm trying to get the gist, to get to more of the essence of what you're looking at.
Yeah, I was thinking about the computer and how things are on the cloud.
Right, I get that.
And thinking about memory and how, is there some sort of sameness there?
Yes, okay, I get that. Okay, this is a very good question, actually. Or the answer is a very good answer. But the question's a good jumping off point to it. I don't know if I can deliver it well. But what you're asking is really good. What you're asking about is what I would call the ground of being, which in a way is where everything comes from. It's like they call it the master memory, or the master storage, or the ground condition that all phenomena emerge from and disappear into without ever actually emerging or disappearing. But don't worry about that for now. So, in other words, a thought you've never had, it appears, and all of a sudden you have it. It's like you think something that you've never thought. There's any particular thought, Where did that come from? It's not just a random energy phenomena like a solar flare might be to someone who doesn't understand solar physics. It's just it's an apparition of what? Where does it come from? What motivates it? Where's the substance of which it seems to be made coming from? Where is it existing when it seems to be present? And where does it go when it vanishes? And the same with memory. So all these forms appear, but it's not just mechanical, it's not just senseless random flashes. There's profound structure and meaningfulness and interconnection, right? I mean, thoughts aren't just like, it's like, there's all of this filigree of interconnection and meaningfulness and profundity. Or memory, memory isn't just random flashes of, whatever, of experiential patterns. It has all these various degrees of coherence and seeming meaningfulness that shows up. So this ground condition that all this comes from, and this is kind of metaphorical in a way, but it's completely inaccurate. This ground condition that everything comes from is actually pure intelligence. It's not inert. It's not just a ground condition like mud, like we imagine mud might be, although mud is actually pure intelligence as well, but forget about that. So the ground condition is pure being and pure intelligence are one and the same thing. The fundamental condition, the prima materia, the basis of reality itself is pure intelligence. You could say, if you wanted to be poetic, you could say it's the mind of God, the infinitely intelligent mind of God. And all of these phenomena that we experience as phenomena, which includes thought, memory, sensory experience, and all that, embody all this astounding structural and functionality, right? I mean, bodies appear and interactions occur and all this amazing, pseudo-meaningful stuff that we're also familiar with in our experience, right? It all is being spontaneously, call it projected, or arising, what have you, within experience, with a kind of a seeming sequentiality and a seeming interconnectedness and a seeming meaningfulness and seeming progression of experiences and so on, what have you, right? And it's meaningful, it's profound and interconnected infinitely because what it's an expression of is that. What it's an expression of is pure intelligence. And the nature of what this is also inherently it's not just pure intelligence, it's also pure creativity. So it's like you could say, again, sort of to be poetic, you could say God's dreaming. And so God is pure hyper-intelligence, existing in itself, not dependent upon anything else. Just the absolute condition happens to be that, unfathomably. It's like the question, where did the Big Bang come from? So here's God, right? Just happens to be. And God is pure intelligence, and God explores itself or dreams itself through its own very nature, its own creativity, its own intelligence generates all of these implications that we think of as our experience, our lives, the universe, what have you. And it's all sort of instantly being improvised in real time, all with profound intelligence and interconnection with itself. And it's like a dream in the sense that it appears out of nothing and disappears back into nothing. But it actually, that's not true, because a dream is never actually there. It seems to be there. It's like a holographic projection or something. It seems to be here, it seems to be actual, but it is actually the ground state looking like this. The dream condition is the deep sleeping consciousness. It never stops being the deep sleeping consciousness and becomes the dream. It looks as if it does, right? But it never actually does. The dream is nothing other than the dreaming consciousness. It never becomes other than that, even though it seems to be. So likewise, all these projections, thought, memory, sense experience, any phenomena whatsoever that shows up in experience is basically like a virtual holographic projection of the creativity of the hyper-intelligent consciousness of the divine, which is what you happen to be. Good answer, right? I don't know if it's the answer to your question, but it's a good one.
Something a little less profound, I suppose.
But it doesn't. You can't do it.
Actually,
you can't do it because it's not like it isn't less profound. I mean, you don't have to go there if that's too much for you to handle, or too much, you say, well, gosh, that sounds nice, but hey, let's get real here. I can understand that. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I can see one might say that, and that's cool. But, the real answer is something along those lines. That answer isn't accurate, because the truth can't be said, but that answer implies it sort of metaphorically and poetically in ways that I think I would say are somewhat profound.
One thing along those lines that I've often thought about is you pretty much know a person that has complete amnesia. Somebody gets in an accident, they don't know their name, they don't know their story, they don't know where they were, they don't know anybody, and yet they're able to speak, they're able to walk.
Sure.
So where's the memory to do that?
Sure.
You can't really say. It's not the same kind of memory that maybe we're talking about when we say you remember yesterday, you remember scenarios that you were in before.
But again, memory is an overqualification. It's a reflection of, call it, meaningful structurality.
Yeah.
So like, for example, your body knows how to be alive. Now your body alive is a completely dynamic, your body is a train wreck in slow motion that somehow continually balances itself sufficiently enough to continue to be a train wreck in slow motion that's balancing itself, right? Life is not, your health is not static and stable and sitting here. It's continually just losing it and saving itself at the last minute, in infinite dimensions at once.
Dynamic equilibrium.
Dynamic equilibrium, or call it dynamic disequilibrium, but sufficiently equilibrated to keep the show going. But eventually that fails, right? And the body stops. But the structure doesn't stop. What happens? Well, all these systems, these cellular systems degenerate to molecular systems, and the molecular systems are reincorporated with other life forms. They come on the whole thing, So the essential structurality just changes its order of organization, but it's no less organization. It's just a kind of a shifting from a macro functioning system to vast groupings of micro functioning systems, all of which are still holographic representations of the same order, the same basic intelligence, the same basic functionality. So functionality is not actually lost at death in terms of the body, because the body continues, but it continues in a different order, a different hierarchy of organization.
That reminds me of a book that I've read a few years ago. It's called Buddhahood Without Meditation.
Yeah, that's a very good book.
And it talks about basically just looking at your body, or looking at what you call, let's say, your hand or something, or a head or something, just looking at a part of your body, and then you try to find out where exactly that label falls, and you can never find it, and then you can even take it and just turn it into atomic particles, and then you can't even say what that is anymore, which is all really you're imposing a structure over this mass of atomic particles and calling it something.
Yeah, and yet there is this astounding functionality, which you might say memory is an aspect of. This astounding coherence of all these different layers, different sort of hierarchical layers of organization of this astoundingly organized system that are all cross-coordinated with each other for super functionality in this sort of virtual display of something that isn't that. Anyway, that's a big mouthful to swallow. It's lunchtime, so speaking of swallowing, I invite you to do some swallowing. We'll defer for about an hour. We can shoot for reconvening around 1-ish if you can make it, or whenever you get here is fine. And have a nice lunch. I guess you all know there's a bunch of little restaurants and stuff down on the strip nearby. So. I call what I present the yoga of radiant presence, very specifically. I mean, obviously it's a made-up name, but what it refers to is, I use that way of referring to it quite specifically. radiant presence is currently the most inclusive phrase I've come to designate this actuality, what it is. It is manifestly and obviously present, or presence, although of course one can't demonstrate or prove what one means by that, but it's self-evidently the case. Presence is a euphemism for being is. There is isness. This is actual. This is here. This is present. But again, without being too precious about what any of these words actually mean. And it is radiant in the sense that it unceasingly presents as experiential characteristics spontaneously. Radiant in the sense that it presents these qualities without any, spontaneously and inherently. So it's like it's continually shining forth with all of these experiential characteristics, which of course we experience as all the phenomena of experience. We have categorizations for a bunch of it, and a lot of it, probably most of it, is beyond categorization. But all of it is part and parcel, exists within, and is, we'll call it a manifestation or expression of this presence, this being that is. And this being, by its very nature, always presents. Even in very deep sleep, which is perhaps close to, it's very minimized, you could say minimized expression, or it's close to not much going on. There's infinite quantity of experiential characteristics there. They're just of a more subtle, maybe to arbitrarily qualify it, subtle quality than the waking state sort of presences are. But they're no less actual, they're no less an inherent expression of what this is. So radiant presence, so this is radiant presence in those terms. And I call it yoga of radiant presence because radiant presence, this event, this actuality, that is what you are, that is what experience is spontaneously engaged with itself. Its very nature is to be exploring itself. What is experiencing your experience is this actuality, and what is being experienced is this actuality. So it's kind of a closed loop. It's like a snake eating its tail or something. So reality is exploring reality, is the event, and, your experience is what you may be used to calling it. And it's a yoga because one piggybacks, and this is all very euphemistic, one piggybacks onto this spontaneous engagement which is inherently occurring by the very nature of experience. Experience is engaged with itself. Experience is, one could say narcissistically obsessed with itself. Experience is unendingly, going into itself as all of this experience, right? And, but the trick is to take advantage of the fact that experience is already self-engaged. You sort of piggyback onto that, and this is all very euphemistic and absurd, and take advantage of the fact that experience is checking itself out, and so you basically tie your notion of what you are and what you're doing into this spontaneous primary level of self-engagement that reality has with itself. And so reality is already exploring itself, so you're off the hook, you don't need to do anything. You just sort of be with this ongoing exploration, and reality spontaneously reveals itself to you what it is, which by its very nature reveals itself, by its very nature reveals these astounding qualities that it actually, could be said to consist of, or could be said to present as. So the discovery of what this is, of this actual condition, this actual transcendental condition, is so far beyond what we're used to framing it as in our frames of reference, is already spontaneously being explored and spontaneously being revealed by the inherent event itself, by this actuality. So one takes advantage of that fact by simply relaxing into that, and that does all the work for you. So the ongoing self-engagement of experiencing itself is the yoga. So nothing needs to be done, nothing needs to be added to it, nothing needs to be strived for, nothing needs to be not done, nothing needs to be avoided. One simply settles into this ongoing self-engagement that experience is, and all is revealed. So that's vaguely what I mean by yoga of radiant presence. Nice for a lazy person like myself. This is wonderful news because the radiant presence is doing the yoga, so I'm off the hook. It's Miller time. Or in this case, coffee time.
I think we should play Simon Says.
One of the nice things about this inherent self-engagement of reality with itself, I forgot what I was going to say.
So what happens if you don't realize all this is happening and you're going to do all the work? You're going to just you just close your eyes and you forge forward. You work.
Sure. Well, this is our normal human mode. You know, we're identifying with doership and we're doing something and we're trying to achieve this and trying to avoid that, and you know the whole rigmarole. And paradoxically, that's it too, but it's a less efficient mode. The maximally efficient mode is to be with it in its mode because it manifests an explicit hyperintelligence, whereas our personal modes manifest an explicit relative stupidity. and again, what's up with that?
That's the reason all along.
So when one settles into this, I know what I was going to say. One of the nice things about this yoga, this ongoing engagement, self-engagement that reality consists of, is that it is ongoing regardless of what's occurring. So it's whether conceptual thought is happening, that is that. When non-conceptual thought is happening, that is that. Whatever is happening is intrinsically this self-engagement, which by its very nature continually deepens. Reality is like moving into itself, ever deepening, which we experience as aging, as gaining in maturity and wisdom, hopefully, spiritual unfoldment. I mean, we have various ways of classifying what is essentially the spontaneous, inherent maturing, or becoming more subtle and more say sensitive to nuance that this event seems to move into.
Yeah, I think even most psychologists these days say that, like 95% of your experience is unconscious. The rest of 5% maximum is conscious.
Sure. I mean, it's self-evident that most of our experience is irrational.
Yeah.
In other words, you can't say what it is. You can maybe you'll throw a label on it, throw a general, caption on, this is vision. But what is vision? It's entirely irrational, unknown, actuality, and so on and so forth with all of this. And all of this has infinite nuance, which is, subtler and more vast, more of the same.
This is on a different topic, but I think, although I'm not sure what the topic was. Last time you were here, Peter, I talked about how I would get these sort of like, I call them flashbacks because they're like actually experiencing a past event rather than just remembering it.
Mm-hmm.
They would come and be very intense about a fairly insignificant event, being with somebody
Mm-hmm.
or walking down a lane or that kind of thing, and then that would trigger their memories. And I've always been sort of wondered or concerned about the fact that I want to grasp it and hold it, and I couldn't understand why I had such sort of an intense feeling to hold that, not let it go. And it occurred to me, I was exploring it after you were last year, and I realized what it was that it was because that person didn't exist. I couldn't find her anywhere. So when these sort of re-experiencing of a past event occurred, I wanted to hang on to it because to make it, and so that was kind of a little bit of a realization for me was that the only time that I am actually in existence really is in the now, if that even exists,
Right.
And I know to most people it might sound like a very simple kind of thing, but I really got it. That I was gone,
Yeah. Yeah. And in particular, the only thing that exists, the only you that is this here now.
Right now.
And you can't pin it down. You can't say what it is. You can't say how it is. That it's actual is undeniable. But saying anything more than that is creating fantasy, creating fiction, pretending to define something that you're talking to your hat. You can't pin it down.
And I think.
But you don't need to pin it down.
No.
Because its open-endedness is what it is. That's its actuality. And its open-endedness turns out to be actually a lot more powerful than definition. Because it's real. Definition is always a pretense. Actuality is intrinsically undefinable. Which turns out to be a good thing, rather than, a challenge which we might think of from a sort of a more normal human perspective. Just sitting here quietly, experience is exploring itself. This presence is melting into itself and experiencing subtle aspects of itself, very irrationally, very, amorphously. But it's an actuality, and this is an intrinsic process that is, incredibly powerful. It's not to be underestimated. It's not like, well, we're just sitting around quietly now. Just anything, or not sitting quietly, sitting and thinking or sitting and talking is exactly the same thing. So the very event of the presence of experience, or the event of experiencing, is this astounding transcendental actuality exploring itself effectively, and it doesn't demand or require anything, from you.
Yeah, well, I've recently been more and more relaxed and more going with the flow, as they say used to say in the '60s, right? And so it's just like whatever happens, happens. You know, I even accepted my apparent narcolepsy. You know? So life is good.
But yeah, and we devalue things relatively. You can't overvalue anything, but we can relatively undervalue anything by qualifying it as something and then defining it as somehow less desirable or less interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whereas the actual presence of any actual experiential event is amazing, and it has a value that cannot be said, literally cannot be said, cannot be thought, but is intrinsic. It is that it is happening is the proof of its profundity.
Oh, I guess on that same line of thinking, I sometimes wonder if I have an intellectual grasp of that, but not an experiential one.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my day-to-day, as things go, perhaps maybe a crisis, or not a crisis, or something will stir, but I know intellectually, it's okay. It is as it is, and so I sort of relax. But I never have this, you know, and I've kind of let go of that largely, but it's still back there. I still kind of wonder if I'm cutting myself short, if I'm denying something out of fear. I'm not sure. It's all very quiet and lovely, but certainly nothing profound.
Well, quiet and lovely is nice, but how do you know it's not profound?
It doesn't feel profound.
Okay. Well, you know, I mean, like I suggest, you can just take a small portion, a snippet out of your day from time to time. Take 5 minutes in the evening or sometime when you have some downtime, and just, you know, feel the presence of light or feel the presence of thought. Don't worry about what you're thinking. Just feel the presence of thought or feel the presence of, you know, of sensation, and just be with it. Just melt into it. Feel it like you're getting into a hot tub. You just sort of immerse yourself in the actuality of the experiencing of it. And don't worry about what the it is. You know? I mean, use that as a jumping off point, like, gosh, let me just be with light. And then let go of the light and let go of the being and just feel the radiant presence that your jumping off point brought you to. And just be with it, just for a minute or two, you know. And basically, it's like I said earlier, it's kind of sensitivity training. It's kind of letting yourself learn to notice and recognize and appreciate and not devalue the incredible subtlety and richness of experience. You know, and again, and it's not like you need to do it in some big bites. Just little snippets, little snippets like that. It's all cumulative. So any little bit, any little, you know, 2-minute snippet, 2 minutes in the evening, every evening, sit, you know, just relaxedly be with a glowing light, or be with the moon, or be with anything, and then just let go of it, and then go about your day and do your thing, however you do it, and think about it or qualify it or not. And then, you know, the next day or whenever you think of it, take another little couple minutes and 5 minutes and just be with something, and you'll be amazed how that will be powerful.
Really, because I practice tea, and that's very much exactly what it is. It's just and it is whatever it is. And, but I don't have this.
Well, don't worry about it. It's not a matter of making it into something or expecting it to be something. Let it be what it is. But, you know, the more open-ended it is, the better. So if it's anything that you can even describe as being anything, that's too much. So it's just hanging out without the hanging and without the out. And not meditating or being anything or not being anything, just, you know, a jumping off point of just have something to sort of prime the pump of, like, I'm going to feel what life feels like now. And then just start doing that, whatever you think that is, right? And then just let go of that and sort of just space out into the experience of that for a minute or two, whatever. 5 minutes, doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be a big deal. And then, let go of it. Or you'll spontaneously drift off of that and drift off into thought or something. It's cool, just go, let it go. Don't try and hold on to it. And don't try to value it or build up value or find value. Just let it be whatever it is, and it will show you the value that it actually has, ultimately. This is magic. It works without fail.
No,
I guarantee you.
That.
But it's cumulative, so you just do little snippets, just every now and again, whenever you think of it. And it's like putting a penny in a piggy bank. After a while, you have $1 million in there. Maybe a long while, but sooner or later, you have $1 million in there.
I was reading just before I came in, just a few little pages of Jean Klein, and he was having this conversation with someone who was trying to get rid of her fear. And someone had said, you have to embrace the fear and all that. And he was saying that it's the acceptance. There's the object is the fear, and it could be any object, accepting this or that. But get rid of the object, and it's just there is only acceptance. And it's sort of, I don't know why, it sort of sounded like what she was saying.
See, the way I would put that, acceptance to me is too heavy-handed. I would say there's presence. And presence is intrinsically, presence accepts itself. But qualifying as acceptance is arbitrary because there's no non-acceptance that's even possible. There's no non-presence possible.
It just is.
Yeah, it just is. So you don't need to qualify as acceptance. It is intrinsically, it intrinsically accepts itself just de facto, right? Just by the fact that it is present. But sure, there's lots of ways of putting these things. But anything that occurs, fear, anything occurs in a context of more than itself. And that context is always present when anything's happening, right? So if fear's happening, there may be fear present, but there's some degree of non-fear also present. Has to be. The world doesn't disappear and just have fear there. Hearing and thinking don't disappear. Sensation doesn't disappear. You may be terrified, but you can still feel your butt on the chair. And that's not fear. It's outside of fear. And so then, there's more. And then in that context, things like fear are energized by definition. They're energized. Fear is essentially, fear is always of a fantasy. It's impossible to be afraid unless you have a fantasy of what you're afraid of. Right? If you're afraid of the boogeyman, it's because you have an imagination of the boogeyman. If you're not defining a boogeyman into existence, fear has nothing to sustain itself. Or you could be afraid of something you're afraid is going to happen. Or you imagine it's going to happen, like, oh my God, tomorrow, my home's being foreclosed. Oh no, this is terrible. What am I going to do? It's horrible. I'm just terrified. But you don't know. You're calling it your home's going to be foreclosed, but you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what it's going to look like. Even if your home is foreclosed, it's not going to look like you expect it to look anyway, and something else will happen. So the problem with fear per se is always relating to a fantasy, relating to something that you define into existence. And anything you define into existence is non-existent. It's a fantasy. Because actuality is unthinkable. Actuality is unpredictable, unexpectable. You do not know exactly what you're going to be experiencing in 1 second, let alone 5 minutes or tomorrow or next year. You don't know what it's going to look like exactly. If you label it broadly enough, you can say, well, in 1 second I'm probably going to be in this room talking, right? Okay, maybe. But that's a very broad definition, exactly what my experience is going to look like, exactly what every nuance of it is going to, exactly what my eyes are going to be resting, exactly what emotions going to be present, exactly what thoughts are going to be present, exactly what sensations are going to be occurring, whether an itch shows up. You can't predict that. And that's real. That it's whatever you're calling it is fantasy. It's not real. It may be it may be an approximation, but again, an approximation and miss is as good as a mind, because it's not the thing itself. And all our problems, every single problem that is possible to have, is due to relating to fantasy as if it was actuality, relating to imagination as if it was objectively true. Period.
I've been wanting to ask this question about fear. Would you say that fear doesn't exist in itself? It always has to exist with an object? That there is no
essentially
thing as fear?
Well, it's subtler than that. Fear is, you could say, energy. Fear is emotional energy, and emotional energy is always present, but it doesn't condense down into or become recognizable or definable as fear until it sets up orienting to an object, as you say, which is always an imaginary object. It's impossible to be afraid of an actuality. You know, when you're afraid, suppose a stranger comes to the door here carrying a knife all of a sudden, just walked in right now. You know, if you felt fear, it's not at the guy being there, it's at your fantasy of what might happen, which will always deviate from what actually happens. Even if he comes in here and starts chopping up people, the actual chopping up is going to look different than the chopping up you anticipate.
Oh, that's nice to know.
Isn't it?
I'm looking afraid of that.
No, but it may seem to be a subtle point, but it's really profound if you look at it.
Yeah.
You know, you can't know what your experience is actually going to look like. You can't know what's actually going to happen experientially. It's impossible. And yet we project these hypothetical things, expectations of, oh, such and such might happen, you know. And then the emotional reaction of fear or pleasure or whatever it is not to the actual event in real time, it's to the projection. And even if it's a projection based on actual event, it's still a projection, which takes it out of the realm of actuality into fantasy, which means you may as well be afraid of Mickey Mouse, you know, or Santa Claus. It's just, who cares? Santa Claus is not going to hurt you or help you for that matter, because it doesn't exist. It's just it's a fantasy. Actuality is too multidimensional and amorphous to define, to know what it is sufficiently to know whether you should fear it or welcome it or anything. Things are too weird, things are too multidimensional. We create stereotypes and oversimplified stick figures of things, and then we think we know what they are, and then we react to those stick figures, not to the actuality. And so it's the same mechanism. We're reacting to our fantasy instead of the actuality. Actualities, you can't say what they are. I mean, think of people, you know people. Say someone you know really well. Who are they? Well, they're them. Well, okay, but who are they? You know, you can't pin it down. You can start to say, well, they're this and they're that and they're bossy and they're opinionated, but they have a good heart and they're this and that. But if you look at every one of those things, it's a stereotype, it's a stick figure, and the actuality of the person is vastly more than that, and subtler than that, and more contradictory than that, more multidimensional. So who are you? You know, we all sort of have a feeling tone of who we are. But look really closely. Who are you? You know, it's like, whoa. You know, weirdness, endless weirdness. You know, you can't say. You don't know what you're going to do. You don't know who you are. And yet, we can have self-images where we sort of think we do. I think I know myself. I think I know my range of behaviors and what I'm going to do. But again, that's a caricature. It's a fantasy. It's a stick figure, an oversimplification of the unknown richness that the actual being of me is.
Peter, talking about fear, animals in the wild learning to survive by avoiding things they know. They use that sort of sense that
Sure.
there's something, there's a possibility, a higher possibility of something happening.
Sure.
And they could survive in that. You know, we're the same way. We don't go down the street in some bad area
Sure.
because we say, well, that fear is ridiculous. We know that there's not wise to go there based
Sure.
on probability.
But that's different than fear.
Yeah. Right.
Avoiding
It's
something is
fear
not.
because you're using
Fear
it.
is projecting the fence. So suppose there's an iffy neighborhood and you're considering walking down it, and then you may have the fantasy, God, if I walk in here, someone might come out and mug me or rob me or shoot me or something.
Yeah.
And then there's an emotional reaction, but it's not to what might happen in the street. It's to the fantasy, the projection. You're reacting to a movie. It's like watching a tearjerker movie and you get teary.
Yeah.
You know, you're not getting teary at the actors. You're not getting teary at the light on the screen. You're getting teary of your fantasy of identifying with the characters,
Yeah,
which is
animals
total.
can't
Which
do
is
that.
total. It's a fantasy. It's a projection.
As far as we know, animals can't project like that, so
Well,
they just react to what's happening.
Yeah, whether or not they can, you know. So again, making choices is not. It does not necessarily involve that kind of fantasy projection.
Behaving appropriately according to what makes sense.
Sure, because intelligence is engaged or can be engaged.
Okay. I like that, what you said, the fear in itself is an energy.
Sure.
And I guess we can leave it at that. I would call it an unpleasant energy.
Right. Well, it's unpleasant by the time it's concretized down to fear, but by the time it's concretized down to fear, you're already locked into the mechanism of relating to a fantasy scenario or something. But there's two alternatives there. If that has already happened and you're already with fear, say fear is already happening, that mechanism is kicked in and you're imagining something and oh my God, that would be terrible, and you sort of freeze up and feel the whole thing, right? You can then, at that point, you can go to the experience of the fear and just feel it. You do noticing on it, like I was suggesting doing with light or something, just as what is present. Instead of calling it fear or even feeling it as fear, just what is present experientially. What is this present as experiential? And then let go of it, whether or not it's fear, let go of anything about it. Just feel the experience that is present. And by its very nature, you will discover that it is very multidimensional, very ambiguous, very incoherent in terms of resolving to something that's single and that you can pin down and make sense of.
Yeah, what is present to me would be like, the fear itself, the energy is almost feels overwhelming, but if I'm not completely captivated by it, then the now is present also. And it's kind of a contradiction almost. There's a now, what is happening,
Sure.
all actually happening, and then there's this other energy thing too.
Sure.
That wants to, as it were, overpower the now. Or my...
But see, no energy overpowers now. Energy occurs within now.
Within now.
Or now presents as energy,
Right.
and is never a conflict. Energy cannot impact or change now. Energy now is the, presence is the scenario within which all energies, all experiential characteristics present themselves. And the presence is not damaged or influenced one way or the other. Presence is like a perfectly clear window within which any and all experiential characteristics seem to appear.
But you have to see, as it were, both. But of course, the trick not to get caught up in the energy.
No. You see, you're approaching it in terms of solving a problem. Don't forget about solving a problem. Just okay. I'm fear I've lost it. You just check off. I screwed up there. But then you can use that as an occasion for exploration. Not as an antidote to fear, although retroactively it will turn out to be that. But if you're intending it to be that, you're still orienting to fear. If you're trying to fix fear, you're still orienting to fear, which reifies it, which makes it more important. When you try and fix something, you're giving it importance, which actually throws gasoline on the fire, so to speak. So you bypass it altogether. Let it win. Like, okay, I'm scared. I lost it. You know, and then in that release, in that okay, you know, in that surrender, so to speak, you know, de facto surrender, then you can feel what is present, and you will discover that what is present transcends merely being fear. It's something wholly indescribable. And in that indescribability, you discover what I call transcendence, or you could say infinity, or open-endedness, or what have you. And then the next time fear comes up, the cycle might be shorter, where you notice, wait a minute, what is this coming up? And right away you go to it, and you discover, well, yeah, initially I took it for fear, but it's just a weird upsurge of energy, you know, or whatever, right?
Like fight or flight kind of thing.
Sure.
Just comes up.
Yeah.
Part of animals' behavior.
Yeah, fight or flight is not fear. Fight or flight is a
hormones going.
Yeah, it's an energy.
Sure. For a reason.
Sure. Any and all experience that we classify as this or that emotion or this or that mechanism is not that. Is an essentially natural, you know, energy function of your call it your energy metabolism or something.
Yeah, I've seen that when I'm driving. It's fun to watch somebody driving and calling all those people assholes.
Yeah. Well, getting pissed off. Getting pissed off is a good one.
Look at the energy in your you can feel it, and it's kind of
sure. Yeah.
The heat goes up over your head.
Yeah.
And you look at it, well, that was great.
Yeah, and because getting pissed off isn't actually that, of course, because nothing is actually what you think of it as being, and this is the point, that actual experience transcends definition. As soon as you're defining it, you're pretending it's something much vastly smaller than it is, vastly less than it is. But you know, it's in my opinion, it's a big mistake or a real detour to approach this remedially, to approach this as solution to problems or solution to, you know, such and such happens. How can I fix it or improve it or be with it better? This is more like preventive medicine, where, you know, it's if you can develop your sensitivity to how subtle and amazing and nonlinear this experiential presence actually is, you will be with your experience more open-endedly 24/7 without any effort. And to the degree that happens, these kinds of relating to things definitionally, relating to things as thinking you know what they are, will become deflated. It spontaneously diminishes. So you sort of solve all problems not by trying to solve them, because again, that reifies them, that makes them more important than they are, but by bypassing them to discover what experience really is. And experience turns out to be intrinsically amazing and beyond all problems. The exact same condition that presents as our problems has no problems in it. And we mistake it, and that's why it seems to present as all these problems. And so this sort of sensitizing training teaches you to be with your experience at a level that is deeper than interpreting them as problems. And so problems basically become irrelevant. And again, it all happens spontaneously, so it's not like you need to do anything. It's all just a matter of just being with this amazing spontaneous event that is already happening. Let yourself be with it as open-endedly as it actually is, and as actually is. You know, your experience is actual. It's precisely the way it is. It's precisely what it is. You know, there's nothing vague about it. It's very exactly this, right here. Just the way it is right now. But what that is, it's precisely very weird. It's precisely very slippery. It's precisely very multidimensional, but not in any vague way. It's exactly and objectively that.
I think I don't know, to me, our biggest problem is just not running away from things. Maybe it's just mine. I mean, just like you say, fear and these other things is letting them be what they are and staying with them. At this escape thing, I see in most people, anything unpleasant, they're always want to get away from it. Anything that strikes them, if it's a person or whatever it is, they fight experiencing it.
Yeah, exactly. And as we were talking about, trying to escape from it is giving it more power, more authority. You're validating it. You're validating it as a real problem. So again, you're throwing gasoline on the fire. So rather than being a solution, it makes the problem, if anything, magnifies it, because you're giving it more credit.
I think that's what Jean Klein's thing was. By objectifying it, you're making it, and trying to accept something as an object, you're making a bigger deal of it than just accepting itself.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sure.
So the whole problem is objectification.
Yes.
Either way.
Well, it's not objectification, it's imaginary objectification. Because reality is the true object. This is real. This is here. It is the actual object. But it's not the object that you hold it to be. And so that kind of fantasy objectification is the problem. I've been sort of calling that defining, This is objectively true. This is real. This is what it is. But it's not what you think it is. And it's not what you call it. It can't be, because it's more multidimensional than words can possibly address, or concepts can possibly grasp. So, I mean, it's the same thing, but it's just sort of a fine point.
So if we have that, if there's that sense of needing to tell this energy or this presence what it is, naming it, defining it as fear, calling it separate from my experience, separate from myself, it's all a justification, perhaps it feels to me, for myself, of justifying my self-identity and, myself, my entity that's separate from everything else that I seem to want to define. Rather than letting everything tell me what it is, I'm telling it what it is.
Exactly. It doesn't just justify the entity you feel you are, it actually reifies it and helps create it.
Yeah.
It's like a ritual enactment of it.
Yeah, perpetuates it.
Yeah, by giving it more importance. And again, I don't recommend approaching this in terms of problem solving, not to solve that problem, but to discover that that problem is actually irrelevant because it doesn't actually exist, which is more powerful, which actually has the effect of solving it, but not by the route of trying to solve it, by the route of just bypassing it and discovering the context in which it exists, and that it has absolutely no validity.
And the real key would be how willing am I to recognize that thing that I think I am, that entity that I think I am, is just as meaningless as the problem or whatever it was I was saying.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the fear, that seems to be a fear.
Sure, but even willingness is personalizing it.
Yeah.
If you have a sort of a blanket engagement or a blanket mode of being with yourself, if you're at a point in your maturity of your unfolding that you are starting to let yourself explore actuality, even in little experiments like I've been suggesting now, that bypasses the whole mechanism that includes all that. That includes a willingness. It's a given that you wouldn't be doing it if you weren't willing to do it. So, but it's irrelevant. It's not about you at that point. It's more about this.
That might be exactly what the meeting is afraid of.
Sure, absolutely. But again, it's desensitization. So you do little bitty tastes. You don't need to scare yourself, or threaten yourself, but do little bitty tastes, and you discover after a while this isn't so bad. There's nothing. There's no boogeyman leaping out of closets or anything. There's nothing very threatening here. And so even if you have to start with the mindset of maybe this is dangerous, maybe this is iffy, you get no evidence to support that. So then you're basically encouraged by the actual event that wow, it's not particularly threatening, and in fact it's kind of fun. It's very interesting. It's fascinating to notice it's all of that, and so it eventually draws you into itself. It seduces you. So it's not something you need to do. It's something that you can't not do because it's so luscious and yummy and fun, and just as a byproduct, it solves all these spiritual problems of fear and ego identification and all this stuff, just intrinsically, without addressing that directly. You just bypass it completely. And in discovering and being with experience as it actually is, you discover all of that just as groundless. It has no evidence. It's hot. It's a castle made in the sky. It's a fantasy. And so it may or may not disappear. It's not like your ego structure or your personality is just going to necessarily go poof, but it loses relevance. It loses its weight, its gravity, its urgency.
It makes life a lot simpler and a lot easier.
Yeah, of course. And you discover how profoundly this is doing itself. This is everything that you're so concerned about and that you've been doing. This has actually been doing all along. So it's like, I mean, you've probably heard me use this analogy a lot because I really like it. It's like one of those kiddie car seats that sit in the passenger seat and it has a little steering wheel and a little horn. It's true, it's not hooked up to anything. But this child sitting there going like this, pretending they're driving and honking the horn. But the wheel's not hooked up to anything. And all of our participatory doership is just like that. I'm doing this and I'm engaged with this and I'm trying to do this and I'm trying to avoid this. It's all just like that, because the actual event is happening spontaneously, just showing up.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, but it's directly discoverable. It's very easily discoverable if that's the case.
But again, I think it goes back to our narcissism because we have whatever this
sure.
is, and we think, there's something I should do or I must do or I should
all that
fix this, whatever, and that's really
sure.
And yet all we are is a little kid thinking they're driving a car.
Yeah, but again, all of that is just based on nothing. It's basically fantasy.
Yeah.
It's insanity.
It is insanity, yeah.
And it's discoverable that that's the case to the degree one looks at what experience actually is. Just that simple engagement spontaneously across the board deflates all of this fantasy orientation. Again, it may not stop it, but it sort of just makes it much less relevant, makes it sort of vague and ghostly.
Yeah, and then we're trying to fix the fantasy too, which is more insanity, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and it's hopeless because how can you fix the fantasy? How can you engage with it?
Yeah, but we try, but yeah, we still think we are all crazy.
Oh yeah, humans are nuts. I.e., us.
Us.
Not them. I mean them, but us. It's almost 2. We have to knock off around 3. So why don't we take a 5-minute break or so, and we can resume and get in some last licks.
We're really going to buy into the system.
Whatever.
Yeah.
It's discovery du jour. Well, anyway, welcome back. I have to take off in about 45 minutes to catch a plane, but as long as we're here, let's party. Or whatever. Anything about anything that's happened today unclear? Or clear, for that matter?
Could we discuss the concept of choice?
Sure.
Okay. In the context of lack of doership.
Sure.
So everything we've been discussing and suggesting presupposes an element of choice.
Sure.
How does that relate then to doership?
Well, choice and doership are both viable approximations of the way things function, but neither of them are accurate approximations of the way things functioning, because all approximations are just that, approximate. So the way anything, there's manifestly what looks like a degree of participation. You know, I can move my hand to the left, I can move it to the right, I can move it to the right again, I can move it to the left, I can move it to the left. So there's manifestly, it looks as if that is choice and doership. But if I look very, very closely at the actual event, you know, where did the whole idea of doing that, the motivation of doing that, come from? Did I decide to decide? And did I decide to decide to decide? So, I mean, an actual choice, an actual free will, would be an impossibility, because in terms of, if you look at how actual functioning happens, because things basically come out of nothing. Things come out of no precedent, and yet they emerge. And it can look like engagement, it can look like choosing, it can look like participation. So there's no reason not to use those terms. There's no reason not to say, you know, I choose to do this, I like doing this, I try not to do this, you know. But that doesn't make that true in a complete sense. Those are approximations, ways of referring to something which is completely beyond that.
So that when we're discussing and being offered different ways to look at things, and, you know, all of the teachings, all the philosophies offer those sorts of things to us, which we can choose to pick up or not pick up, or to look at or not look at. How does that relate to being that kid not steering the wheel?
Well, just exactly the same way. The choosing can happen, but that doesn't necessarily make it actually choosing. But there's no reason to throw choice out of your lexicon, or to get sort of ultra extremist about it. There's no choice, so I will never use the C word again. You know. And yet, I think a good way to look at these kinds of things, these kinds of ways we qualify functioning or occurrence, is as seemings. So choice is something, it seems to be like choice. It seems to be like participation. It seems to be like no doership. It seems to be like doership. It seems to be like this. It seems to be like that. Which is the truth. I mean, that pretty much nails it down. It seems like I'm choosing to sit here and talk. But if I really look, if I get out my microscope and look very closely at the whole thing, it's like, why am I here? I can't answer that question. I mean, if I am choosing to be here and talk, why on earth did I choose to be here and talk? You know, and so again, you know, ultimately you get to mystery very rapidly at that kind of analysis. Everything just sort of basically...
So it's an infinite regress.
Well, it's an infinite regress logically, but if you look at the actuality, which is not a logical but an actual, called an energy event, it basically emerges from no precedent, and, you know, emerges mysteriously, let's say. You know, you can't trace it linearly to a specific causal chain or a context. And it's not just a question of criticizing analysis. It's pointing out that the actuality is really like that. It really, you know, everything that is the way it is at some point was not that way. And if you look at the phase transition from when it was not that way to where it is that way, seemingly, it's strange how that happens, and it's not obvious or logical or it's not scrutable. It's mystery. You know, so, I mean, you know, you can look at anything that way. And yet it can look like choice. It can look like participation. So there's nothing wrong with sort of euphemizing, you know, using those terms in terms of discussion, but they aren't precise. I mean, that applies to all, in all terms. Any word we say is basically in the same category.
That's right. It all is that.
Yeah. because these are all approximations referring to an actuality which is completely not actually like that. Not actually like what the ways we refer to it seems to imply that it is. But that's not a problem. You just see that that is the case, and then you don't trip over your own inexactitude.
I didn't follow that at all.
Well, it's no problem. Who cares?
That's just actually.
We were splitting hairs. Just philosophy.
That's kind of what I
Philosophizing.
decided. I thought, oh, whatever. But seriously, if somebody called me on the phone and said, Sandra, would you like to go out for dinner now? I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock. No one ever does that, but let's say they do.
Right. That'd be nice.
Another fantasy. And right at that moment, I'm choosing to say yes or no.
Sure.
So what am I missing?
When you say you're choosing to say yes or no, if you look very closely at what's actually happening, there's a mysterious element in there. Where does your choice come from? You don't run a computer simulation of all the options and everything you've ever experienced and logically decide what would be the best thing to do. There's a kind of a semi-random, or let's call it intuitive, or inspirational, or arbitrary, emotional, bias that your clients, I'd really rather not. Or, that'd be great. And ultimately, like I said, there's just an element in that whole event that is mysterious, that is irrational, that is, can't say what, that transcends description. And so describing it as choice is
not accurate.
Exactly, assuming that it actually is literally choice in the way that the word might imply. It turns out not to be the case, because all choice is actually a very complex, functional coming together of all sorts of energies that constitute your being, most of which are irrational and not chosen per se.
Exactly, yeah. But
another way to put it is you make the choices you make because of who you are, and you didn't choose to be who you are. Someone else would choose something differently in the same situation, perhaps, because they're who they are. But they didn't choose to be who they are, they just happen to be who they are.
Yeah, I get it.
And that's a mystery. Why are you you? Why aren't you me? So you could, well, maybe. But so choice is an oversimplification at best. If you take it as being literally choice.
Right, but we use those words because.
Exactly. It's a matter of getting that language as approximation. Language is basically hand waving. People that try to be sort of semantic purists are pretty much shit out of luck. because what this is not accurately addressable. It's not addressable on a one-to-one basis with words. Because words imply kind of an either-or differentiation. It's up or down. It's a tree or it's a rock. Whereas reality is not like that. Reality has all kinds of ambiguities in both ends, and things aren't necessarily cut and dried this or that. They're kind of paradoxical and weird and multidimensional and morphing, and in some ways they are this, in some ways they're not this, and so that inherent, irrationality, or maybe transrationality would be a better word, what this is, makes it impossible to accurately address it in words. But we can still keep trying.
We do.
It's a fun art form, if nothing else.
Well, the poets, I think, get closer because they're not using words in a concrete sort of absolute. They're creating a sense or a.
Well, poetry explicitly includes irrational elements. In fact, poetry, I would define poetry as a deliberate evocation of the irrational. And so in that context, you're transcending the very words you're using.
Yes, absolutely,
Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. So here we are. This is the presence of your experience. Absolutely nothing more and nothing less. And what it is amazing, weird, and completely actual. It's completely what it is. And, I invite you to play with it, check it out, explore it, because you're going to anyway. That's what experience is, intrinsically, so you may as well, be on board for the party.
It's more fun if you accept it as being a party, right?
Sure, why not? Hey, it's your choice, right?
I'm wondering why does it, we're all here in this room and we're all earnestly in some way or another, we're seeking something in some way or another, although we're trying not to seek because,
It's spiritually, politically correct to try to not be a seeker.
Right. So we're doing all that
I'm a former seeker. I'm trying to give it up.
So we're all sort of tangled up in all of this, but sincerely sort of doddering along as best we can. And I wonder, I'm curious about why, and I'm wondering why not be sort of, because a lot of people that are curious, but they're not maybe curious about this, but why not be just getting along with your life, not thinking about these things, not being aware.
Why not? Why not?
Yeah, but I'm wondering, is there any sort of benefit in it? I'm not looking for a benefit. Heaven forbid, I'm looking for a benefit. But what is it? Why are we doing this?
It's a very good question. It's a koan. It's a mystery.
It is, isn't it? I mean, what is the motivation? What drives us? What pulls us like? There's a poet, speaking of poets, he called his book God, and I can't remember the name of the poet, but the title of the book was God Hunger. And I think that's kind of in some way evocative of what pulls people along. There's this, and maybe it's part of being this, and this experience is having that pull that draws us toward.
The way I see that, or would put that, is that, this is an inscrutable process, which is what it is and is doing what it's doing. And at a certain point in that, whatever that is, it begins to get more explicitly curious about itself. It's always exploring itself, and it's always intrinsically curious about itself. But at a certain point, it begins to get more explicitly curious about itself. And this shows up as this kind of questing spirit, or search for something deeper, or search for truth, or being a seeker, and whatever that formula shows up. Being more actively engaged in pursuing or exploring the possibility of spiritual unfoldment. Whether you define it in those terms, but what spiritual unfoldment really is, or what it is intuited to be. And this becomes relevant at a certain portion, at a certain arc of one's maturing, of this process reaching a certain point where all of a sudden that seems to sort of come to the fore. And at that point, seekerdom may seem to manifest explicitly, and so on and so forth. And it's of course it's completely mysterious. Why? Who knows?
And then you, for example, Peter, have you an understanding of, you come up north to talk to us to make all this money, which is like...
Oh, I'm getting rich. Actually, I don't see a penny of it.
I know. I mean, it's remarkable that you do this. I mean, it's really true service, but, have you sort of questioned your... do you ever say to yourself, why am I driven to do this, to help these folk?
No, not per se. Of course, I know that I'm insane. That's a given. But above and beyond that, it's beautiful. It's joyous. To me, it's the epitome of what I can conceive of human engagement. Is this, exploring this, engaging with people in this addressing these issues. It's an art form, and it's extremely, like I said, I think it's the most profound, the most subtle art form in many ways, and so it's a delight to participate in that. So in one sense, it's completely selfish. So I get to do something that I think is really, really cool, which is exploring these things, and exploring these things with you forces me to explore them for myself. Because, I don't have like an encyclopedia somewhere that has all the answers and I memorize it all and come into a talk and spit stuff out. I mean, when I sit down at a talk, as you probably noticed if you've seen several of my talks, I have no idea what I'm going to say, and I just start talking. And I talk from this. I talk from this presence, not in some metaphysical, religious sense, but this actual, this here-ness. I'm with this here-ness in the way that I am, and I basically talk about that, aspects of it that I happen to be noticing at that moment, or whatever, as it comes to the forefront of my awareness sufficiently to verbalize or whatever. And so it's in a way you could say it's a spiritual practice, because I'm engaging with my own experience in a way that from my striving to do it well, sort of demands refinement and demands, some degree of attempted precision and so on. And so that in itself is an interesting exercise for me. I mean, exercise isn't a good way to put it. It's a profound engagement in my own being that in some sense is always going on, but dealing with it in this way where I'm trying to mine it out and make it explicit, and I won't claim to make it logical because there's no hope there, but making it somehow evocative or communicative in some sense is it's a fascinating exercise. It's a profound exercise that is very fulfilling in itself. So in short, I like it. The short-winded version.
We like having you do it too.
Well, that's great. It's a win-win. I mean, I'm probably here for the same reason you are. You like it. It's meaningful to you in some sense, and you probably can't say exactly why, but it's juicy. Something about it rings true. Like I'd rather be here doing this than at home watching TV. Or I'd be at home watching TV. Go figure.
Oh, thank you.
Peter, can you say something about the learning process? It seems to me that learning is life. We're doing that
absolutely
all the time.
Yes.
And I get this as I walk around, this funny feeling like I'm in kindergarten.
Sure.
And what I actually seem to understand and what's going on, it's just like kindergarten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. But and that can seem to happen because a large part of this process of spiritual deepening, of spiritual unfoldment, is learning to move away from identification with the conscious self and the conscious mind and its processes, which are very limited, and learn to trust, to settle into and to trust, which first happens very irrationally and almost unknowingly. The more intuitive, more intrinsically intelligent modes of experiential, direct energy engagement, you might call it, or experiential engagement, which is what I'm trying to indicate here. So, in this transitional phase where we're sort of partially being with our life in terms of our identified personality and our conceptualization and our ideas of ourself and our ideas of what we're doing, it is relatively kindergartenish compared to the more subtlety and profundity of these more intuitive modes. But again, it's all at these transition points when you're sort of moving from one to the other. It's very murky and unclear, and there's an intuition that there's something there, And there may be an intuition that is profound and powerful and maybe ultimately trustworthy, but exactly what it is and what's going on can be very mysterious. And again, as has been brought up several times today, can seem threatening too, because it can feel like you're stepping off a cliff from moving from a normal, human mode of me being Peter Brown and my history and my education and blah blah blah, into this sort of strange realm of eternal now and eternal here, and all this strangeness, which is clearly actual, but somehow what? Wait a minute. So it can be a little not necessarily threatening, but at least, what am I doing? Can give pause.
When you were talking about the ground of being,
Mm-hmm.
You're not talking about a void, the void.
Well, it's what might be called a void, because it
It's where
the answer is, when people talk about the void, they're talking about the ground of being, but the ground of being is not a void. But what it is can't be said. It's an absolutely transcendental actuality, which looks like nothing and everything.
But neither is the void actually void. Right?
Well, there you go then. Since they're one and the same, yeah.
So it is.
The important thing to know about that is it's actual, but it's completely unassailable by logic or by trying to get a handle on it. But it's not. But it is actually knowable, because this is actually that. This is the ground of being, in exactly the same sense that when you're dreaming, that is sleep. It's not like when you're dreaming, it's not like sleep is over here and the dream is over here. It may kind of seem that way. It may kind of be held to be that way, but in actuality, the dream is exactly sleep. The dream is what sleep happens to be looking like at that moment. And nothing other than sleep has been created, even though it may seem to have been. It's like a virtual otherness that is not an otherness, and there's not, in fact, anything, even though it seems to be, which of course is very strange, and yet there you go. So likewise, this here is literally this absolutely supreme transcendental ground of being. This is the divine. Literally, this is the case. It's simply the case that is so. And all of this that it looks like is actually that too, even though it doesn't look as if that's the case. It looks like, oh, this is the world, and here we are in Seattle, and blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, it looks like that. It seems to be that. And the way in which that's so is very strange and subtle if you look at it. But it is possible to directly know this condition, this fact, that it is what it is and that it is that way. Not with your rational mind, not analytically.
Can you say that again? I didn't hear.
It is possible for you, for anyone, but for you, to actually know this for a fact, to know what we're calling the ground, to know the way that all of this seeming superficiality is actually that. It won't make sense, and you won't ever be able to explain it or say it, but you'll be able to know it most profoundly and self-verifyingly. You have to, because there's nothing else to know. You end up with truth because anything else doesn't stand up. Truth is the only thing that goes the distance. Actuality is the only thing that goes the distance in the long run. Bullshit can stand up for a long time, but sooner or later it's going to...
So is there any wonder that we're drawn to this?
Well, of course.
Drawn to...
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely no wonder, because you're drawn to yourself, you're drawn to your own profundity, you're drawn to the divine, you're drawn to the truth, because the truth is value.
Right.
The truth is the only value, and all value is the truth. What is nourishing is the truth. What is life-giving is the truth. What life is the truth. What it actually is. And so, of course, it's drawn to itself. And this engagement that looks like your experience is that celebration of that being drawn to itself, because it's drinking itself, literally. Like a snake eating its tail.
I sometimes find it useful to really look at what knowing actually is.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
So really, it just opens up.
Yeah, sure.
And it merges with light, it merges with revelation, it merges with identity, it merges through all those.
Yeah. How is this being experienced? How is this being experienced? What is this being experienced actually? What is going on here? Just that, you know. Here it is. It's not hidden. What it's only hidden by its own subtlety and its own weirdness. But if you let yourself be subtle and weird, which you are, you'll find you can go there. You can actually follow it. But you have to let go of those portions of you which resist being subtle and weird. And
I should say, sometimes when I'm playing with something like that, trying to sort of get closer to what the grounded being is or whatever, sometimes I just sort of sit and just experience what life is, you know.
Sure. That's a good one.
And it's a real sort of fine, subtle kind of energy that's not just confined to my body space.
Absolutely.
And that really helps a lot, I think, to kind of touch that a little.
Absolutely. The life force, or you can call it the force of the flow of time, the force of presence, you know, and calling it a force is euphemistic, but in a certain sense it feels like a force. It has an amazing oomph to it. And it's palpable, it's actual, it's real. It's not a subtle or abstract thing. I mean, it's endlessly subtle, but it's also completely obvious, and it's accessible. You know, it's a great meditation. Just feel your own life force, and just follow it down into subtlety. Follow it down into, into just let it open up into whatever. Just be with it as it is, and it opens up and includes everything, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But it's nourishing, it's real, it's juicy, it's intelligence, it's life. Yeah, but it's totally accessible. I mean, these kinds of things which sound so, grandiose and, it's all really very simple and very accessible. You know, it just don't let the weirdness of it put you off. Just do it anyway. It's completely available.
And I think and to sort of look for it sort of outside of yourself too. I mean, I remember one. And I used to be really quite phobic about insects, but a tiny little teeny, those little gnats, and I just kind of I just laughed out loud because it was like this little bit of life.
Yeah, sure.
There was a little bit of life. It was like it had become concrete. This
absolutely.
And it was this little, but it was so tiny.
Sure.
But it was life going around,
Or even inanimate matter, the same force permeates it. Look at like grains of dust dancing in a sunbeam sometime. What is this force? What is this amazing dynamism that's doing all this? What's doing the laws of physics? It's all the same thing. And it's not, it sounds like an abstraction to talk about it that way, but it's anything but. It's completely concrete. It's totally experiential. And you are it, and again, not in an abstract sense, you literally, palpably are it. So, by all means, I mean, these kinds of things there's no reason to suppose you can't just jump right to the depths. There's no reason you need to, be timid about needing to, play it safe or be preliminary. Just do it anyway. Just like, go right to God.
I'm running out of time, so
well, sure.
Let's get a move on.
Yeah, well, sure. What the heck? We're all running out of time, right? And no one here getting any younger, right?
In other words, jump off the cliff because eventually you'll fall off the cliff anyway.
Well, yeah, or jump off the cliff, because why the hell not?
Yeah.
You got any better to do? The thing's really that interesting, playing it safe on top?
Maybe the cliff is one of like in the cartoons where you go up and you just keep.
Yeah, sure. The cliff is maybe a virtual cliff where the fantasy and the dread of, oh no, the cliff, the cliff, the cliff. But then you jump and, hey, wasn't so bad. Who knows, eh? One way to find out.
Is there any art form that comes closest to what you experience as truth and reality?
I'm not sure what you mean by truth and reality, but I would answer that, just interpreting it randomly, I would answer that every art form. Good art good art is good art to the extent it's a revelation. And what it reveals is, of course, always reality, because there's nothing else to reveal. I mean, wow factor is a good indication of revelation. Anything that you look at, like you look at a beautiful sunset, or you look at a Van Gogh, or whatever, you look at something and it's just, wow. Now, what is that wow? Why is it wow? You can't answer that question, but it's undeniable. It's like there's something there. Something profound and beautiful and moving and, juicy.
For me, it seems to make a difference when I remember to include myself in the picture, because it seems like, looking this way, that there's always forgetting to go this way.
Yeah. But either way, I mean, both either or, it's still the same wow. But sure, I mean, it's wherever you find it, what you find inside and what you find outside are one and the same. And ultimately, they include each other. So it doesn't really matter your starting point. You don't need to be necessarily too heavy-handed about trying to, affect the inclusion, because ultimately you will discover it anyway, because it's intrinsic. So any point of any sort of, let's say, any jumping off point experientially, what you find there, if you go the distance, will be the same thing you find at any other point of experience. Subjective, objective, self, other, anything. And ultimately, it's all inclusive and all transcendental.
Do you think there are certain cul-de-sacs you can kind of get yourself into?
Very much so. Very, very, very much so. And but it can't be explicated explicitly. You have to. That's down to the artistry of the individual yogi, of having the wit to be able to notice when they're stuck in a cul-de-sac. This self-delusion is, of course, the enemy, if there is one. And so the artfulness of being able to determine when you're stuck, to not misinterpret stuckness as profundity. Or perhaps having the wisdom to discover that stuckness and profundity aren't necessarily opposites. But it's all, that's into the yogic bag of tricks of what kind of flexibility and genius and rule breaking you can bring to the table. A great deal of yoga is having the wit to break the rules, having the wit to do the impossible when it's convenient, or when it's inconvenient.
Yeah, of course, I never thought about it that way, but like recently, I guess for the last week or so, I've been working on a transcription of a Bach prelude that he wrote for the Well-Tempered Keyboard, right, for guitar, and all of these incredible voice leadings and so forth, you know, trying to transcribe that onto the guitar, which is,
I can imagine, yeah,
difficult, you know. So I ended up almost doing it measure by measure, and if I moved, you know, if I got the note on the wrong line of the staff, you know, it seemed to work, but then I'd realize, oh, that's not the way Bach did it. And but then you know, like you say, I'd have to go back to you know, okay, how can I adapt this, you know, for the guitar, because it won't work. So I ended up with one or two measures that simply were my own creation.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's why it's called an adoption.
Yeah, right.
Because you have to bend the rules to make it work.
It's like the wow factor came in all the time, because every measure had its own little wow. Mm-hmm. You know.
Yeah, so. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I mean, one thing that I say fairly often, I haven't actually said it today at all, is it's results that count, not process. Mm-hmm. You know, get revelation by hook or by crook. Lie, cheat, and steal. Don't worry about process. Don't be obsessed with being polite or careful or correct. Just like, you know, steal the bacon. You know, if you can contrive, if you can break your own rules, and get it more easily, go for it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about Bach, but I know that Handel was famous for cheating by stealing from himself all the time.
You know, it turns out to be, in a certain sense, very subtle, but this is all about loopholes. This is all about loopholes, because the very, very strange nature of this condition is that it's always at the finish line. This is always realization, even if it's delusion. And so realization is always available. So if you have the wit or luck or cussedness to somehow make that jump, just make it. Don't worry about fine points or process, because there isn't actually any. You know, the delusion is realization. This is the absolute. You know, this world and your shitty life and this, that, and the other is the absolute. And the ball's in your court, basically. So what do you do with that? Well, you know, you can go to talks, you can read books, you can sit in meditation, you know, an hour a day, you can do this, you can do that, you can do the other, you can say screw it and go out and look at sunsets, you go out and get drunk, you can, I mean, whatever, you know, what you do is absolutely wide open, but it's down to your inspiration of what's going to do the magic, what's going to do the trick, what's going to put you through the looking glass, you know. Because it's not, there's no, you don't have to get from any here to any there. So there's not actually any process necessarily. But it's down to your individual luck, skill, genius, you know, craziness to be able to take advantage of that condition. I mean, realization is a trick. It's all a trick. Unrealization is a trick. So, as such, it's amenable to tricks. Since it's all a trick anyway, it's susceptible to tricks. So you don't need to be polite or careful or proper with it. You don't need to go through channels.
You know, when you were talking about spiritual unfoldment earlier, I was sure I was hearing you talk about unspiritual foldment.
Unspiritual enfoldment.
Right.
Yeah, hey, well, who knows?
It may seem like opposite.
No, it's all very, very strangely homogeneous. the greatest opposites and the most drastic polarities turn out to be one and the same.
Right.
It's all in the fine print. It's like tax law. It's all in the loopholes. You owe X thousands of dollars to the government, except you don't really if you take advantage of it. You were stuck in delusion and for 100,000 lifetimes of sweating your way through the ranks, but not really if you take advantage of it. Well, it's just about quitting time, I'm afraid. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure hanging out with you today, and I wish you the best and hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be up here, I expect, in about 2 months or so, God willing.
And the creek don't rise. Do we know where we're going to meet next time?
Well, it will be determined. Something will happen, or not.
I'm sure of that.
God will.
Even though it's completely unknown.